This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. Summer of 2008 was when my life as a police sergeant in Riverside took a turn I never could have imagined. I'd been with the department for 8 years by then, promoted to sergeant 2 years prior. My name is Vanessa Torres, and I supervised a team of 6 patrol officers in the Eastern District, including Orange Crest. It started with little things that seemed like simple errors. As a supervisor, I reviewed incident reports daily, and I began noticing small inconsistencies in dispatch information for the Orange Crest neighborhood. An address would be slightly off, or the reported emergency wouldn't quite match what our officers found when they arrived. These weren't major issues, just the kind of small errors that happen in any system where humans are involved. But then Officer Rodriguez mentioned something odd during our morning briefing. He'd responded to a domestic disturbance call, but when he arrived, the couple was confused. They hadn't called police. The dispatcher had clearly sent him to the right address from the call, but somehow the call itself was wrong. The weirdest part, Rodriguez said, was that the dispatcher sounded different. Like, I know Mercer was on duty, but it didn't sound exactly like him. I probably would have chalked it up to a crossed line or a prank call if not for what happened 3 days later. I was reviewing response times when I noticed a pattern. The calls with errors or discrepancies weren't random. They formed a kind of geographic pattern across Orange Crest, and all had occurred within specific time windows. I went to Lieutenant Grayson with my concerns, but he wasn't convinced it was anything more than coincidence and dispatcher error. Torres, our dispatch center handles thousands of calls. Errors happen. Unless you've got something concrete, this is just statistical noise. But it didn't feel like noise to me, so I started digging deeper on my own time. I pulled recordings of the calls in question and listened to them obsessively. Something was off about some of them. The cadence wasn't right. The terminology wasn't consistent with our protocols. And then I found one where the dispatcher identified himself as Craig Mercer, but the voice was definitely not Craig's. I went back to Grayson with the recordings. This time he listened more carefully. "Jesus," he said when I finished playing them. "Someone's intercepting our calls." Within hours, we had a small task force set up. We brought in IT specialists from county, kept the investigation tight. Just me, Grayson, and 4 officers I trusted completely. If someone was manipulating our emergency system, we couldn't risk them finding out we were onto them. We mapped every irregular call over the past 6 months and found something terrifying. The pattern wasn't just geographic, it was focused on response times. Someone was testing how quickly we could get to different parts of Orange Crest. They were timing us. For what? We didn't know, but it couldn't be good. We set up a system to track any unusual activity in the dispatch center and put plainclothes officers in unmarked cars near the locations of previous suspicious calls. Then we waited. The break came 5 days later. Officer Sarah Collins was parked in an unmarked sedan outside a row of townhouses when she spotted a man acting strangely. He was carrying what looked like radio equipment and kept checking his phone while moving between houses. When he went into the backyard of one of the units, Collins followed at a distance. She radioed it in. "Possible suspect, east side of 1345 Palmetto. Male, white, early 30s, carrying what appears to be technical equipment." I was 10 minutes away and told her to maintain visual contact but not engage. By the time I arrived, everything had gone to hell. Collins had caught the man coming out of the house with not just radio equipment but a folder full of surveillance photos, all women who lived in Orange Crest. When she identified herself, he bolted. She tackled him in the driveway of the neighboring house. The guy fought like a cornered animal, managed to slam Collins' head against a concrete planter, leaving her dazed, and then disappeared between houses. We locked down the area, brought in K9 units, but he was gone. The equipment he dropped was sophisticated, modified police scanners, signal boosters, and a custom device that could apparently intercept and inject audio into our radio frequencies. The photos were even more disturbing. Women going about their daily lives, entering homes, at work, shopping, all carefully labeled with addresses, schedules, and notes. That night, Craig Mercer, one of our regular dispatchers, didn't show up for his shift. When we tried his cell, no answer. I sent officers to his apartment. Empty, no signs of struggle, but his car was gone. We put out an APB on his vehicle. A patrol unit found Mercer's car abandoned in a shopping center parking lot around 2 in the morning. Mercer was in the trunk, bound with zip ties, dehydrated and bruised, but alive. When he was coherent enough to talk, he told us someone had jumped him in his apartment building's parking garage the previous evening, injected him with something, and he woke up in the trunk. He kept asking me about dispatch protocols, Mercer said, his voice shaky. How we verify caller locations, what our response priorities were. Said if I cooperated, he wouldn't hurt me. While Mercer was being treated at the hospital, we caught a break. A detective recognized the suspect from Collins's description. Victor Rayburn, 34, rejected police dispatcher applicant from 2 years ago. Failed the psych evaluation, had technical expertise from his time in the Army Signal Corps. We hit Rayburn's apartment at dawn. He wasn't there, but what we found made my blood run cold. One room had been converted into what could only be described as a command center. Maps of Orange Crest, with response times meticulously noted. Photos of 12 women on the wall, connected by red string to addresses, workplaces, and schedules. At the center was a photo of Carol Thompson, 31, a nurse at Riverside Community Hospital. Piles of notebooks contained detailed information on each woman, when they left for work, which grocery stores they used, what time they typically arrived home, which windows in their houses were vulnerable, which neighbors might notice unusual activity. One journal entry read, Thompson ideal first acquisition, lives alone, night shifts mean daytime extraction possible, neighbors elderly, limited visibility from street. Police response, 8 minutes, 12 seconds weekday afternoons. Acquisition. The word made me sick. We immediately sent officers to Thompson's address. Her car was gone, and neighbors said they hadn't seen her since the previous morning. Cell phone triangulation was unsuccessful. Her phone was either off or destroyed. We put together Rayburn's movements from neighbor statements and security footage. He'd been watching these women for at least 14 months, documenting their every move. The 911 call interceptions had been to test response times in their neighborhoods, creating a map of where he could operate with the longest window before police arrived. By midday, we had every available officer searching for Thompson and Rayburn. We found Thompson's car abandoned at a trailhead in Box Springs Mountain Reserve. Park rangers reported seeing a man matching Rayburn's description, hiking up one of the more remote trails the previous afternoon, carrying what looked like camping gear. We organized search teams and began combing the reserve. It was brutally hot, over 100 degrees, and the terrain was rough. I led one of the teams up the eastern trail, checking every possible campsite and hidden area. After 4 hours of searching, one of our K9 units picked up a scent. We followed it to a small canyon about 3 miles from the trailhead. As we approached, I heard a gunshot echo through the rocks. We moved in fast, weapons drawn. In a small clearing, partially hidden by boulders, we found a tent and makeshift campsite. Carol Thompson was there, bleeding from a gunshot wound to her shoulder, but conscious. Rayburn was dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Thompson was dehydrated and in shock but alive. As medics worked to stabilize her, she told me Rayburn had been waiting in her garage when she got home from her shift. He'd forced her at gunpoint to drive to the reserve, hike to this remote spot, and set up camp. He kept talking about the collection, she said, her voice barely audible. Said I was just the first, that he had everything prepared, that no one would ever find us. When he'd heard our search teams approaching, he'd panicked. Thompson had used the moment to try to escape, and he'd shot her. Then, realizing he was cornered, he'd turned the gun on himself. Back at the station, we pieced together the full picture from Rayburn's journals and computer files. He had systematically gathered information on 17 women over 14 months. The 12 on his wall were his primary targets, with 5 others as alternates if any of his main targets became unavailable. His plan, which he called the collection, was to abduct all 12 primary targets and keep them in remote locations throughout the San Bernardino Mountains. He had already prepared 6 sites with supplies, restraints, and basic shelter. The sites were carefully chosen to be outside cell coverage and away from hiking trails. The most disturbing part was his methodology. He hadn't chosen his victims randomly. He'd studied police procedures, dispatch protocols, and emergency response systems to identify women who lived in areas with slower response times or where calls could be more easily intercepted and redirected. In one journal entry he wrote, "The system designed to protect them will be what delivers them to me. When they call for help, I'll be the one who answers." The investigation continued for months. We discovered Rayburn had built specialized equipment that could tap into our radio frequencies and even mimic our dispatch center's phone systems. When someone in his target area called 911, he could sometimes intercept the call, gather information, and then pass it along to the real dispatch with subtle changes, testing response times or simply learning more about his potential victims. The department did a complete security overhaul of our dispatch systems, new encryption, new protocols, new verification systems. The FBI came in to help us understand exactly how he'd compromised our communications. They told us they'd never seen anything quite like it before, someone weaponizing the emergency response infrastructure itself. I still check on Carol Thompson occasionally. She moved away from Riverside, changed careers. The last time we spoke, she told me she still can't bring herself to call 911, even in an emergency. She keeps pepper spray and a baseball bat by her bed, sleeps with the lights on. As for me, I still work for Riverside PD, got promoted to lieutenant last year, but I don't see the job the same way anymore. When I hear dispatch sending officers to a call, there's always that moment of doubt. Is this real? Is someone manipulating us? And sometimes, late at night on patrol, I'll drive through Orange Crest and wonder if there's another Rayburn out there, watching, testing, planning. Someone who saw what he did and thought not about the horror of it, but about how to do it better. That's the thing that still keeps me up at night. Not just what happened, but what could happen next. Because now we know the systems we built to keep people safe can be turned against them by someone who knows how they work. And that knowledge can't be unlearned. Story 2. For context, I was going through a really rough patch. My girlfriend of 3 years, Melissa, and I had just broken up after months of constant arguing. 2 weeks later, I quit my job at the marketing firm where I'd been working for the past 5 years. The environment had become toxic after new management took over, and I just couldn't deal with the stress anymore, especially after the breakup. I needed to clear my head, so I decided to go on a solo hiking trip in the Great Smoky Mountains. I've always loved hiking, and being alone in nature usually helps me process things. I planned a 3-day trip to a remote section west of Klingman's Dome. It's less traveled than other parts of the park, which was perfect because I wanted solitude. I arrived at the trailhead around 2 in the afternoon. The weather was perfect, mid-60s, partly cloudy, with a light breeze. I remember feeling hopeful for the first time in months as I shouldered my pack and started hiking. The trail was beautiful, winding through thick forests of old-growth trees with patches of wildflowers scattered throughout. I saw a few other hikers early on, but as I continued deeper into the wilderness, they became fewer and fewer until I was completely alone. By 6 in the evening, I'd hiked about 8 miles and found a perfect spot to set up camp near a small creek. It was a peaceful clearing surrounded by tall pines with enough open space for my tent and a small campfire. The creek provided a soothing background noise that I thought would help me sleep. I set up my tent, collected firewood, and made dinner. Just some rehydrated camping food, but it tasted amazing after the long hike. As the sun began to set, I sat by the fire drinking tea and feeling more relaxed than I had in months. I remember thinking that this was exactly what I needed, time away from everything to reset. The stars came out as darkness fell, and they were incredible. Living in the city, you forget how many stars there actually are. I sat there for a while, just staring up at the night sky, listening to the creek and the occasional rustle of animals in the underbrush. Around 10, I decided to turn in. I put out the fire carefully, brushed my teeth at the creek, and crawled into my sleeping bag. That's when things started to get weird. As I lay there trying to fall asleep, I felt this strange pressure building in my chest. At first, I thought it might be anxiety or indigestion from the camping food, but it didn't feel like either of those things. It was like someone was sitting on my chest, making it slightly harder to breathe. Not painful or suffocating, just uncomfortable, persistent. I tried to ignore it and focus on the sound of the creek, but the pressure wouldn't subside. I tossed and turned for what felt like hours, checking my watch periodically. 11 o'clock passed, then 11:30, then midnight, and I was still wide awake with this weird feeling in my chest. Then I heard it, a cough, a human cough, not an animal sound coming from outside my tent. It was a single distinct cough, like someone clearing their throat. My first thought was that another hiker had set up camp nearby without me noticing, which was odd, but not impossible. I sat up and called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No response. The pressure in my chest intensified. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my tent, poking my head out. The night was clear and cold, with a nearly full moon providing enough light to see the outline of the clearing. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Then I noticed someone sitting by the creek about 15 feet from my tent. It was a woman. She was sitting on a rock at the creek's edge with her back to me. Even in the dim moonlight, I could see that her hair was long and tangled, and she was wearing what looked like a dress that was torn in several places. She wasn't moving at all, not swaying, not shifting, just sitting, perfectly still, staring at the water. I called out again, "Hey, are you okay?" Still no response. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped fully out of the tent. The pressure in my chest was almost painful now, but I was more concerned about this woman. What was she doing out here alone in the middle of the night? Was she lost? Injured? I walked a few steps toward her and shined my flashlight directly at her. The beam illuminated her clearly, but she didn't react at all to the sudden light. She just continued sitting there, completely motionless, staring at the creek. Her dress looked old-fashioned and was definitely torn and dirty. Her hair was dark and matted, hanging down her back. Something felt very wrong. No normal person would sit like that, completely ignoring someone calling out to them and shining a light on them. I stopped about 10 feet away from her, suddenly unsure if I should approach any closer. "Miss, do you need help?" I tried again, my voice cracking slightly. Nothing, not even a twitch to indicate she'd heard me. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, my flashlight beam steady on her back, debating what to do. Part of me wanted to walk around to see her face, but something held me back, some instinct telling me that was a very bad idea. Then I heard a rustling in the trees behind me and glanced over my shoulder for just a second. When I looked back at the creek, she was gone. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was literally impossible for her to have moved from that spot without me hearing or seeing her. The creek was making noise, but not enough to mask the sound of someone getting up and walking or running away. And in the few seconds I'd looked away, she couldn't have gone far enough to be out of the range of my flashlight. But she was completely gone. I rushed to the spot where she had been sitting, sweeping my flashlight beam in all directions, calling out again. Nothing, no sign of her anywhere. But then I looked down at the damp earth by the creek, and my blood ran cold. There were footprints, bare human footprints, pressed into the mud right where she had been sitting. They didn't lead anywhere. They were just there, as if she had been sitting with her feet in the mud and then vanished. The pressure in my chest suddenly felt like it was crushing me. I couldn't breathe properly. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. I ran back to my tent, hands shaking so badly I could barely grab my things. I didn't even pack properly, just stuffed everything into my backpack as quickly as possible, leaving behind some cooking gear in the process. I took down the tent in record time, constantly looking over my shoulder, swinging my flashlight around at every small noise. There was no way I was staying there another minute. I knew hiking at night was dangerous, but it seemed less dangerous than whatever was happening in that clearing. I shouldered my hastily packed backpack, turned on my headlamp, and started hiking back the way I had come. The forest that had seemed so peaceful during the day was terrifying at night. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every rustle in the underbrush made me jump. I kept my flashlight in one hand and my pocket knife in the other, though I don't know what good I thought it would do. I hiked for about 4 hours through the darkness, moving as fast as I safely could on the trail. Twice I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned around, there was nothing there. The pressure in my chest didn't subside until I was within a mile of the trailhead. I reached my car around 4:30 in the morning, threw my pack in the trunk, and locked myself in the driver's seat. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm down enough to drive. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The next morning, after getting some sleep at a motel, I went to the ranger station to report what had happened. I tried to be as factual as possible, but I could tell from the ranger's expression that he thought I was either crazy or making it up. He took down my information and said they'd look into it, but his tone made it clear that they wouldn't. I asked if there had been any reports of missing women in the area or any similar sightings. The ranger just shook his head and said, "People see all sorts of things in these mountains when they're alone at night." It's been a month, and I still can't shake the memory of that woman by the creek. The absolute stillness of her, the way she disappeared without a trace, those footprints in the mud that led nowhere. I keep thinking about who she might have been, or what she might have been. Was she a ghost, some kind of forest spirit, a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion? I've done some research since then and found a few old stories about a woman who got lost in that area of the park in the 1930s and was never found. But there are probably dozens of similar stories about these mountains, so who knows if there's any connection. All I know is that I'm never hiking alone in the Smokies again, especially not in that remote section west of Klingman's Dome. Whatever I encountered that night, it wasn't natural. And the strangest part is that sometimes, usually when I'm about to fall asleep, I still feel that pressure on my chest, just for a moment, as if something followed me home from those mountains and is reminding me that it's still there, watching. Story 3. I still can't explain what happened to me last month on that stretch of Route 66 through New Mexico. I've been driving trucks for over 20 years, seen just about everything the road can throw at you. Elk jumping out of nowhere, dust storms that turned day to night, even helped at accident scenes that would make most people sick. But nothing, and I mean nothing, has ever shaken me like what happened that night. It was around 1 in the morning, and I'd been pushing hard to make a delivery in Albuquerque by morning. The desert at night has always been peaceful to me. The stars overhead, the empty road ahead, just me and my rig eating up the miles. But something felt off that night. The darkness seemed thicker somehow, like it was pressing in against my windshield. My headlights didn't seem to cut as far into the night as they should have. I remember checking my mirrors more than usual, getting this creepy sensation that someone was tailgating me, but every time I looked, there was nothing but darkness behind me. I cranked up the radio to shake off the weird vibes, but all I got was static. Strange for that area. Usually, I can pick up something, even if it's just some late-night religious broadcast or country station. I tried the CB next. Nothing but static there, too. I called out a few times. "Breaker 19, this is Big Mark. Anybody got their ears on?" Nothing. Not even a hint of another voice. Just that persistent hiss of static that seemed to get louder the more I listened to it. By this point, I'd been driving for about 12 hours straight. My eyes were getting heavy, and I was fighting to stay alert. I kept slapping my face, rolling down the window to let the cold desert air hit me. But I knew I needed to stop soon or risk nodding off at the wheel. That's when I saw the sign, Lucky's Truck Stop, 2 miles ahead, gas, food, rest. I felt this wave of relief wash over me. I knew Lucky's. Small place, kind of run down, but the coffee was strong, and the old lady who ran the diner part always had fresh pie. I'd stopped there maybe half a dozen times over the years. When I pulled off the highway, something immediately felt wrong. The place was completely dark. Not a single light on in the diner, nothing illuminating the fuel pumps, not even the big neon sign that usually buzzed with Lucky's in bright red letters. The parking lot was empty, not a single truck or car anywhere. I pulled up, to the fuel pumps anyway, thinking maybe they were just having an electrical problem or something. When I got out of my cab, the silence hit me first. In all my years of trucking, I've never experienced silence like that. No distant highway noise, no desert insects, no wind, nothing. It was like someone had pressed a mute button on the world. The second thing I noticed was the dust. The fuel pumps were covered in it, like they hadn't been used in months, maybe years. When I touched one, my finger left a clean streak through what must have been a quarter-inch of grime. That didn't make any sense. I'd passed through this way just a few weeks ago and everything had been normal. I walked over to the diner, my boots crunching on the gravel being the only sound for miles. The windows were dark, but not just dark like the lights were off. Dark like there was nothing inside at all. I cupped my hands around my eyes and pressed against the glass to see inside, but it was like looking into a void. I tried the door handle, locked. I knocked, hard enough that it should have woken anyone inside. Nothing. That's when I noticed my truck. I'm not sure how to explain this without sounding crazy, but it looked faded somehow, like it was being slowly erased from existence. The red paint of my Peterbilt didn't look solid anymore. It was like I could almost see through it to the darkness beyond. My heart started hammering in my chest. 20 years on the road, and I've never felt fear like that. Something was very, very wrong here. I started backing away from the diner, planning to get back in my truck and get the hell out of there, when I saw movement at the edge of my headlight's reach. It wasn't a person, at least not exactly. It was more like a gap in reality. A shadow that was darker than the night around it, with no features I could make out. But it was moving, sliding along the edge of the light with this slow, deliberate grace that made my skin crawl. It wasn't walking. It was gliding, like it was being pulled along by something. I don't remember running back to my truck. I just remember suddenly being in the driver's seat, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over, thank God, and I floored it out of there, not even bothering to turn around properly. I just needed to get back on the highway, away from whatever the hell that was. I drove flat out for maybe 20 minutes, my heart still pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. When I finally felt safe enough to slow down a bit, I tried the CB radio again, desperate to hear another human voice. Breaker 19, this is Big Mark. Is anybody out there? Please respond. For a few seconds there was just that same static. Then a voice crackled through. This is Night Owl. What's your 20, Big Mark? You sound shook up. I nearly cried from relief at hearing another person. I told Night Owl roughly where I was and asked if he knew anything about Lucky's truck stop. There was a long pause before he responded. Lucky's? You sure that's where you were? I described the place, the location, everything I could remember. There was another longer pause. Listen, buddy, Night Owl finally said, his voice different now, more careful. Lucky's truck stop burned down in '87. Nothing's been there for over 20 years. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. That's impossible. I've stopped there before, recently. No way, man. That place is gone. Has been since I started driving this route. There's just an empty lot there now. Has been for decades. I didn't know what to say to that. I knew what I'd seen, or at least I thought I did. But Night Owl had no reason to lie to me. And the condition of the place, all that dust, the emptiness, suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. But if Lucky's had been gone for 20 years, what had I pulled into? What was that thing I saw at the edge of my headlights? I drove straight, through to Albuquerque without stopping again. By the time I reached a real truck stop, dawn was breaking, and I've never been so happy to see other trucks, other people, lights and noise and all the signs of normal human activity. I sat in that truck stop diner for 2 hours, drinking cup after cup of coffee, trying to make sense of what had happened. I even asked a few of the other drivers about Lucky's. The older ones remembered it. Place that burned down back in the 80s, right? Bad business, that. Owner went crazy, they say. Locked the doors with customers still inside. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadow thing, felt the unnatural silence of that place. I've taken different routes since then, even though it means longer hauls. I can't bring myself to drive that stretch of Route 66 again, especially not at night. Sometimes when I'm driving now, I'll catch a glimpse of something in my mirrors, just for a split second, something darker than it should be, moving in a way nothing should move. And sometimes, late at night when the CB's quiet, I'll hear this faint static that seems to have a pattern to it, almost like words just below the threshold of hearing. I don't know what happened to me that night. Maybe I fell asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing. Maybe it was some kind of hallucination from too many hours on the road, but it felt real. It still feels real, and sometimes I can't shake the feeling that something followed me back from that place, something that's just waiting for the right moment, when I'm alone on some dark stretch of highway, to show itself again. I've been driving these roads for over 2 decades, but now I find myself avoiding night hauls whenever I can. And if I absolutely have to drive after dark, I make damn sure I know exactly where I'm stopping, and that it's a place with lots of lights and lots of people, because whatever was waiting for me at that phantom truck, stop. I don't think it's done with me yet. And the next time I see a sign for a place that shouldn't exist, I'm keeping my foot on the gas and my eyes on the road ahead. Some stops aren't meant to be made. Story 4. I've been sitting on this experience for months now, debating whether to share it or not. Part of me wants to forget it ever happened, but I can't sleep properly anymore, and maybe writing it down will help. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts or supernatural stuff. I've always been pretty logical. But what happened that night in Duskland County has shaken everything I thought I knew about reality. So I'm a bit of an amateur adventurer. Nothing crazy, just someone who likes the road less traveled. My friends always joke about my obsession with finding hidden gems and abandoned places. Last summer, my buddy Jake dared me to do a solo cross-country road trip through some of the most isolated parts of the country. No major highways, no tourist traps, just forgotten roads and small towns nobody remembers anymore. I was all over it. I planned the route carefully, packed my Subaru with supplies, and hit the road on a Tuesday morning. The first few days were amazing. I found these incredible little diners where the locals actually talked to you, saw some breathtaking landscapes, and felt that freedom that only comes when you're completely disconnected from your regular life. By the 5th day, I was crossing through Duskland County. I'd never heard of it before planning this trip, and now I wish I never had. It's this massive stretch of plains with barely any towns, just endless fields and the occasional cluster of buildings that barely qualifies as a settlement. I was driving along this narrow 2-lane road as the sun started setting. The sky turned this deep orange-red color that made the whole landscape look surreal. My GPS had been acting weird for about an hour, constantly, recalculating and then losing signal entirely. My phone showed no service bars at all. I wasn't too worried though. I had paper maps and enough gas to reach the next town, which was supposed to be about 70 miles ahead. That's when things started getting weird. The road seemed to stretch on forever, and I swear I passed the same dead tree 3 times, which is impossible because I was driving straight. The light was fading fast, and with it, my confidence. I started calculating how long I could safely drive in complete darkness on this unfamiliar road when I spotted it. A small, dimly lit sign on the right side, Riverside Motel, with a flickering neon vacancy sign underneath. My first thought was, what river? There hadn't been any water around for miles. But I was exhausted, it was getting dark, and the idea of a bed, any bed, was too tempting to pass up. I slowed down and turned into the gravel driveway. The parking lot was completely empty, which should have been my first real warning. The motel itself looked like something from a forgotten era, a single-story L-shaped building with maybe 12 rooms total. The paint was peeling badly, showing gray wood underneath what might have once been blue. Most of the windows were grimy, and a few had their curtains drawn despite the vacancy sign. I sat in my car for a minute, debating whether to keep driving. Something felt off, but I chalked it up to being overtired. Eventually, I grabbed my overnight bag and walked to the office, which had a dim yellow light inside. The door creaked when I pushed it open. The office was small, with wood-paneled walls covered in what must have been decades of cigarette smoke residue. Behind a chipped formica counter sat this elderly man. I still get chills thinking about him. He had these deeply sunken eyes that seemed too dark for his face, and his skin had this waxy, almost translucent quality to it. It didn't move right when he looked up at me. "I need a room for the night," I said. Trying to sound casual, he didn't respond verbally. He just stared at me for what felt like forever before slowly reaching under the counter. He pulled out an actual metal key, not a key card, an old-fashioned key, attached to a faded red plastic tag with the number 9 on it. He slid it across the counter without saying a word. How much for the night?" I asked, pulling out my wallet. 47, he said in a voice that sounded like he hadn't used it in years. I put 3 20s on the counter. "Can I get a receipt?" He took the money but made no move to give me change or a receipt. He just stared at me until I grabbed the key and awkwardly backed away toward the door. "Checkout's at 11, he finally said as I was leaving. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. The hallway leading to the rooms was dimly lit with fluorescent lights that flickered randomly, casting these weird, shifting shadows along the cracked walls. The carpet was this faded pattern that might have been floral once, but was now just a series of dark stains on a gray background. It felt damp under my feet, even though I was wearing shoes. Room 9 was at the far end of the hallway. The brass number hung at an angle, held by a single screw. The key stuck in the lock, and I had to jiggle it several times before the door finally opened with a groan that echoed down the empty hallway. The smell hit me first, musty and stale, like the room had been closed up for years. It was basic. Queen bed with a faded green bedspread, a small TV on a dresser, a chair in the corner, and a bathroom. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, revealing patches of black mold underneath. The bedside lamp gave off a weak, yellowish light that barely illuminated half the room. I put my bag down and checked my phone again. Still no signal. The TV only played static no matter which of the few channels I tried. I resigned myself to just sleeping and getting out at first light. The bathroom was surprisingly clean compared to the rest of the place, though the fixtures were ancient. I splashed some water on my face, and that's when it happened. I caught a movement in the mirror's reflection. Not my own movement, but something behind me, like a shadow passing quickly across the wall. I spun around, heart racing, but the bathroom was empty. Just my imagination, I told myself. I was tired. It was a creepy place. My mind was playing tricks. I finished washing up quickly, keeping my eyes on the mirror the whole time, but nothing else happened. Back in the main room, I checked the locks twice and even pushed the chair against the door before lying down on the bed fully clothed. I didn't plan to get under those sheets. They looked clean enough, but something told me not to. I kept the lamp on and tried to relax. The silence was what got to me first. It was absolute. No traffic noise, no TV from neighboring rooms, no air conditioning hum, nothing. I've been in quiet places before, but this was different. It felt like the silence was pressing against my ears. I must have drifted off despite my unease because I jerked awake suddenly, completely alert. The lamp was still on, but something had changed. I lay perfectly still, listening. Tap, tap, tap. There it was, a rhythmic tapping sound. At first, I thought it might be pipes or the building settling, but it was too regular, too deliberate. It seemed to be coming from the door. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up slowly, staring at the door. The chair was still wedged under the handle. The tapping continued, same rhythm, same intensity. I cleared my throat. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding strange in the silent room. The tapping stopped immediately. I waited, straining to hear any sound. 10 seconds passed. 20. Then, just as I started to relax, bang! 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 The door shook violently, the chair jumping against the handle as if someone was throwing their entire body against it from the outside. I scrambled back on the bed, heart pounding in my chest. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. The banging stopped as abruptly as it had started. Then came the whisper. It was so close it could have been right next to my ear, but I knew it was coming from the other side of the door. "Room for one more." The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It sent ice through my veins. I grabbed my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight, even though I knew there was no one to call. The door handle began to turn slowly, despite the chair. The lock made a soft clicking sound as it disengaged on its own. The chair started sliding across the floor as if being pushed by an invisible force. I grabbed my bag and backed toward the bathroom, looking for another way out. There was a small window above the shower. Maybe I could fit through it. But before I could move, the main door swung open. The hallway beyond was pitch black, not dimly lit like before, completely dark, as if the door had opened into an abyss. And then I saw it, a pale, skeletal hand emerging from the darkness, reaching toward me with long, gnarled fingers. I don't remember screaming, but my throat was raw afterwards, so I must have. Somehow I managed to dart past the door, keeping as far from that reaching hand as possible. I ran down the hallway, which was now in complete darkness. I couldn't see anything, but I kept running, one hand on the wall to guide me. I burst into the office, but it was empty. The chair behind the counter was vacant, the room cold and abandoned looking. I didn't stop to think about it. I just ran outside to my car. The parking lot was exactly as I'd left it, my car sitting alone under a single flickering light. I jumped in, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine started on the first try, and I floored it, gravel spraying as I peeled out onto the main road. I drove for maybe 20 minutes at breakneck speed before I dared to look in my rearview mirror. What I saw, or didn't see, makes me question my sanity to this day. The motel was gone, not hidden by distance or darkness, but gone. Where it should have been was just an empty field, as if the building had never existed at all. I drove through the night, stopping only when the sun came up at a busy truck stop where I sat in the brightly lit diner, drinking coffee after coffee, unable to process what had happened. I've spent months researching Duskland County and the Riverside Motel. There's no record of it anywhere, no reviews, no mentions in local guides, nothing. The few maps of the area show no motel, and more disturbingly, no river. Sometimes at night, just as I'm falling asleep, I hear it again, that soft tapping followed by those words, "Room for one more." I still don't know what happened that night or what would have become of me if that pale hand had reached me. All I know is that I can never take that road again, and a part of me wonders if it's even there anymore. Story 5. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can help me make sense of what happened. I still get chills thinking about it, and I haven't been able to work a night shift since. It was around 3 months ago when I took the overnight operator position at Meridian Insurance. The pay was decent, $22 an hour just to answer occasional calls and do some basic data entry. For someone who'd just finished their associate's degree and was drowning in student loans, it seemed like a no-brainer. The building itself should have been my first warning. It was this massive gray concrete structure from the 80s, sitting about 15 minutes outside town in what used to be an office park. Half the other buildings were vacant now. Meridian was hanging on by a thread from what my supervisor told me during my brief training. Most of their operations had moved online or overseas, but they maintained this skeleton crew for legacy clients who preferred calling in. During the day, maybe 30 people worked there. At night, just me. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. The first few nights were uneventful but unsettling. The fluorescent lights flickered constantly. Maintenance was on the list, but never seemed to happen. The heating system made these long, groaning sounds that echoed through the empty hallways. And the carpet. God, that carpet. Stained brownish gray with decades of coffee spills and who knows what else. But the worst part was the silence. After the cleaning crew left around 11, it was just me and 5 floors of emptiness. I'd get maybe 3 calls a night, usually wrong numbers, or confused elderly clients who didn't realize what time it was. The night it happened was a Tuesday in October. Foggy as hell outside. I couldn't even see the parking lot from the windows. I remember checking the time, 2:16 a.m. I hadn't received a single call all night, which was unusual even for us. I was mindlessly scrolling through my phone, fighting to stay awake when the phone rang. The sound nearly made me jump out of my skin. I took a deep breath and went into my script. Thank you for calling Meridian Insurance. This is Alex speaking. How may I assist you tonight? Nothing at first, just breathing. I almost hung up thinking it was a pocket dial when I heard it, a voice that sounded strained, like someone trying to speak quietly. Don't go. I'm sorry, I replied, sitting up straight. This is Meridian Insurance. Do you need assistance with a claim? They're watching. The voice was raspy, maybe female, but I couldn't be sure. Who's watching? Is this an emergency? I can transfer you to... They're here. Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a good minute. My heart was racing, but I tried to rationalize it. Probably just some drunk person, or teenagers messing around. We got prank calls occasionally. Still, something about the caller's tone left me deeply unsettled. Company protocol required that I log every call, even the weird ones. So I noted it down as possible prank call and tried to shake it off. I decided to do my hourly walkthrough of the floor to clear my head. Our call center was on the 3rd floor, a sea of gray cubicles with dated computers. My desk was positioned near the elevator bank so I could greet anyone who came in, not that anyone ever did at night. As I walked through the darkened cubicle farm, I kept hearing small noises. The kind that make you stop and listen before convincing yourself it's just the building settling. When I reached the break room, I noticed the vending machine light was flickering worse than usual. I made myself a cup of coffee from the ancient machine, wincing at the burnt taste. As I headed back toward my desk, I felt a cold draft that hadn't been there before. That's when I noticed something odd about the elevators. All 3 of them were sitting with their floor indicators showing 3, my floor. This had never happened before. Usually they rested on different floors, but there they were, all 3, as if waiting. I approached cautiously, that cold feeling intensifying. As I got closer, I could have sworn I heard whispering coming from behind the doors. Not clear words, just sounds, like multiple voices talking over each other. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me gasp. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Get out now. I stood frozen, staring at my phone. This had to be a prank, right? Someone from work messing with the new night guy. But how would they have gotten my personal number? Before I could process it, the office phone at my desk rang again. I hesitated before answering it. Meridian Insurance, this is Alex. I told you not to go. It was the same strained voice. Who is this? I demanded, trying to sound authoritative. Despite my shaking voice, look at the elevator. I turned just in time to see the middle elevator's button light up. No one had pressed it, at least no one visible. The display showed it was going down to the 1st floor. What's happening? I asked, but the line was already dead. I hung up and immediately dialed the security company that monitored the building. After 4 rings, someone picked up. Security. This is Alex from Meridian Insurance, 3rd floor. I think someone's in the building. The alarm system is armed and shows no breaches, the guard said in a bored tone. All exterior doors are secure. Could you check the cameras? I'm seeing some strange activity with the elevators. Elevators do that sometimes, power fluctuations. We can send someone to check, but it'll be about 45 minutes. We're short-staffed tonight. 45 minutes felt like an eternity. Fine, Please send someone." After hanging up, I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway leading to the restrooms. Slow, deliberate steps. I called out, "Hello? Security coming?" No response, but the footsteps stopped. I grabbed the letter opener from my desk, a pathetic weapon, but better than nothing, and cautiously walked toward the hallway. The motion sensor lights should have turned on as someone walked through, but the corridor remained dark. I flipped the manual switch, but nothing happened. The bulbs must have burned out. Using my phone's flashlight, I peered down the hallway. Empty. I turned back toward my desk just as my phone buzzed again. "She's behind you." I spun around so fast I nearly fell. Nothing, just the empty hallway. Then I heard the elevator ding. I slowly turned to see the middle elevator doors opening. From where I stood, I could only see darkness inside, not the usual interior, but what looked like an empty shaft. That's when rational thought left me completely. I bolted for the stairs, dropping both my phone and the letter opener. As I pushed through the stairwell door, I heard that whispering again, louder now, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. I took the stairs 2 at a time, nearly falling several times. When I reached the ground floor, I slammed into the push bar on the exit door, but it didn't move. I tried again, harder this time. Nothing. It was locked. That was impossible. Fire regulations required these to be accessible at all times. I could hear footsteps in the stairwell above me now, slow, steady, coming down. The only other exit on this floor was through the main lobby. I burst through the stairwell door and sprinted across the darkened reception area. The main doors were just ahead, their outline barely visible in the dim emergency lighting. As I reached for the doors, my body went cold. There, reflected in the glass, I could see the lobby behind me, and I wasn't alone. A figure stood in the shadows near the reception desk. I couldn't make out features, just a darker shape against the darkness. I yanked on the doors, but they too were locked. The security system required a key card after hours, which was upstairs at my desk with all my belongings. I was trapped. The whispering started again, but now I could almost make out words. Almost, but not quite, like a radio caught between stations. I pressed myself against the doors, watching as the figure by the reception desk took a step forward. Then, all the lights in the lobby came on at once, blinding me momentarily. When my vision cleared, the lobby was empty. No figure by the desk. The whispering had stopped. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. My relief lasted exactly 3 seconds before every light began to flicker rapidly. Through the strobing effect, I saw all 3 elevator doors open simultaneously. They were empty, not bottomless shafts like upstairs, just normal elevators. But somehow that was worse, because standing in the lobby now were dark silhouettes. 3 of them, perfectly still, facing me. I screamed and ran back to the stairwell. No longer caring what was coming down from above. I'd take my chances with a different floor, find another way out. As I re-entered the stairwell, the door swung shut behind me with such force that the sound echoed like a gunshot. I looked up the stairs, then down toward the basement. No sign of anyone. I decided to try for the 2nd floor, thinking maybe I could find an office with a window I could break. As I climbed, I kept looking back, certain I was being followed. The 2nd floor door opened easily. This floor housed the claims processing department. More cubicles, more flickering lights. I moved quickly between the desks, looking for an office with a window large enough to climb through. I found one labeled Regional Manager and tried the door. Locked. I moved to the next one, also locked. Then I heard it, a phone ringing. Not the muffled sound of a cell phone, but the distinct ring of an office desk phone. I followed the sound to a cubicle in the center of the floor. The phone stopped ringing just as I reached it. On the desk was a note written in what looked like black marker. "Don't trust your eyes." The handwriting looked like my own. I backed away, bumping into a desk behind me. The impact sent a cup of pens clattering to the floor. As I bent to pick them up, I froze. The pens weren't falling. They were suspended in mid-air, hovering inches above the floor. I straightened up slowly. watching as the pens gradually descended to the carpet as if gravity had temporarily malfunctioned. That's when I noticed how quiet it had become. The usual hums and creaks of the building had stopped. It was absolute silence until I heard my name. Alex. It came from everywhere, from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. My name, spoken by that same strained voice from the phone. I ran. I didn't care where, just away from that voice. I found another stairwell on the opposite side of the building and burst through it, only to find myself not in a stairwell at all, but back in the third-floor call center. At my desk, everything looked normal. My coffee cup, half empty. My notebook open to the page where I'd logged the strange call. My phone sitting next to the keyboard, not dropped in the hallway as I remembered. The phone rang. I stared at it, unable to move. It rang again and again. On the fourth ring, I picked it up. "Don't go," said the voice. "They're watching." I slammed the phone down and turned to run, only to find myself face to face with me. Another Alex standing there in identical clothes, wearing an expression of pure terror. We reached for each other at the same moment, and our hands passed through each other like smoke. The other me opened its mouth as if to scream, but no sound came out. Then it flickered like a bad television signal and disappeared. The lights went out completely. In the darkness, I heard the elevators ding, all three of them in perfect unison. When the emergency lights came on a few seconds later, I was alone. But the elevator doors were open, showing 3 empty cars. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran to the emergency exit and down all 3 flights of stairs, not stopping even when I heard footsteps matching my pace somewhere in the darkness above and below me. The first-floor emergency exit was unlocked this time. I burst out into the foggy parking lot and ran to my car, fumbling with my keys. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The building looked normal, all its windows dark except for the emergency lights on the 3rd floor. And a single figure standing at the window of my call center, watching me drive away. I never went back. I called the next day and quit. They seemed unsurprised. To this day, I don't know what happened in that building. Was it all in my head? Was I asleep at my desk, having some vivid nightmare? Or was something there with me? All I know is I still get texts sometimes from numbers that don't exist when I try to call them back. Always the same message. Don't go. They're watching. Story 6. I'm still not sure if I should be sharing this. It's been 5 years, but sometimes I wake up in cold sweats thinking about what happened. I guess writing it down might help me process everything. Maybe someone will see this and be more careful than I was. This happened back in 2018. I was driving from Vegas to Tonopah on Highway 95 for a job interview. The company had a mining operation out there, and they needed an environmental compliance specialist. The pay was good, really good, and I was desperate after being laid off 3 months earlier. My interview was scheduled for 8 in the morning, so I left Vegas around 4 a.m. I know that sounds crazy, but I wanted to get there with plenty of time to spare, maybe grab some breakfast and collect my thoughts. Plus, I've always liked driving at night. There's something peaceful about having the road to yourself, especially out in the desert where you can see for miles under the stars. I was about 2 hours into my drive, somewhere around mile marker 220, when I noticed flashing lights behind me. My heart immediately sank. I checked my speedometer. I was going maybe 5 over the limit, but still, a ticket was the last thing I needed before this interview. I pulled over onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under my tires. The highway was completely empty except for me and whoever was pulling me over. No cars had passed in either direction for at least 20 minutes. I rolled down my window and got my license and registration ready. In my rearview mirror, I could see it was a white vehicle with red and blue lights on top. I assumed it was a highway patrol officer. The headlights were blinding, so I couldn't make out much else. I waited for the officer to approach, but after about 30 seconds, nobody had come to my window. I looked in my side mirror and saw someone walking toward my car. Something felt off. The figure was wearing what looked like a uniform, but I couldn't make out any patches or badges. He had a flashlight pointed at the ground, and he was walking slowly. When he got to my window, he shined the flashlight directly in my face. I squinted and held up my hand to block the light. "License and registration," he said. His voice was flat, emotionless. I handed him my documents, still unable to see his face clearly because of the flashlight. "What seems to be the problem, officer?" I asked, trying to sound polite. "We've had reports of drug trafficking in this area," he said. "Would you mind stepping out of the vehicle?" That's when the first real alarm bell went off in my head. Why would I need to get out for a simple traffic stop? But I was also scared of making things worse by refusing, so I unbuckled my seatbelt. "Can I see your badge first, please?" I asked, surprising myself with my own courage. He lowered the flashlight slightly, and I got my first clear look at him. He was wearing what looked like a highway patrol uniform, but something wasn't right. The patches looked, I don't know, like they weren't sewn on properly. And the badge he flashed at me seemed off, too shiny maybe. "I'm Trooper Daniels," he said. "Now step out of the car, please." I remembered reading somewhere that you should always ask for ID and call dispatch to verify if you're unsure about an officer, but I was in the middle of nowhere with no cell service. The nearest town was at least 40 minutes away. "Actually, officer, I'm not comfortable getting out. Could you please tell me why you pulled me over?" His demeanor changed instantly. The professionally detached tone vanished, replaced by something harder. "Get out of the fucking car now," he growled. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that this man was not a real police officer. My blood ran cold. I had my hand on the gear shift ready to slam it into drive, when I noticed something in his other hand, something black and rectangular with two metal prongs, a stun gun. Pure survival instinct took over. I threw the car into drive and floored it, tires spinning on the gravel before catching on the asphalt. In my rearview mirror, I saw him running back to his vehicle. Not a police cruiser, but a white panel van with magnetic lights stuck to the roof. I've never driven so fast in my life. My old Honda pushed past 90, then 100 miles per hour. The road was dark and empty, which was both a blessing and a curse. No other cars meant no witnesses, no help if I crashed, but also no innocent bystanders to get hurt. The van was keeping pace behind me. Whoever this guy was, he had souped up his engine. The lights were still flashing, creating this surreal strobe effect on the desert landscape around me. I was terrified he might have a real gun, but I couldn't stop. Not now. About 5 miles down the road, I saw something that made my heart leap, headlights approaching from the opposite direction. I started flashing my high beams frantically, hoping to signal that something was wrong. The oncoming vehicle was a semi-truck. As it got closer, I did something incredibly dangerous. I swerved into the oncoming lane, forcing the truck to brake hard. The van behind me also had to slow down. I pulled alongside the truck, waving frantically at the driver, pointing back at the van. The truck driver must have understood something was wrong because he brought his rig to a complete stop, blocking both lanes of the highway. I screeched to a halt just past him and jumped out, running toward the truck cab. The van had stopped about 50 yards back. We were at a standoff. The truck driver, a big guy named Mike as I later learned, opened his door and looked down at me. "What the hell's going on?" he asked, eyeing the van with its flashing lights. "That's not a real cop," I gasped, out of breath from adrenaline and fear. "He tried to pull me over, wanted me to get out. He has a stun gun." Mike reached under his seat and pulled out what looked like a tire iron. He also grabbed his phone. "I got no service, but I'm calling 911 anyway. Maybe it'll go through." The van had turned around and was now speeding away in the opposite direction, lights still flashing. Mike took a photo with his phone before it disappeared around a bend. "You're lucky you found me," Mike said. "This stretch is notorious. People disappear." He insisted on escorting me to Tonopah. I followed his truck the rest of the way, watching my rearview mirror obsessively. When we finally reached town, we went straight to the local sheriff's office. I'll never forget the deputy's face when we told him what happened. He immediately got on the radio, putting out an alert for the van. Then he sat me down and showed me a map with pins in it. In the past 5 years, we've had 5 people disappear along that stretch, he explained. Their cars were found abandoned with hazard lights on, belongings still inside. Just last month, a woman named Melissa Carver vanished. Her car was found at mile marker 218, not far from where you were pulled over. I gave them a description of the man, mid-40s, average height, buzzed hair, what looked like a scar on his neck. The deputy nodded grimly. Sounds like it could be Lloyd Mercer, he said. He did time for assaulting a stranded motorist back in 2009. We've questioned him before, but never had enough to bring him in. The photo Mike took was blurry, but it clearly showed a white panel van with magnetic emergency lights. The partial plate was enough for them to confirm it was registered to Lloyd Mercer. I missed my job interview, but I ended up staying in Tonopah for 3 days, working with the Nevada Highway Patrol. Trooper Daniel Reyes was the lead investigator, and he took my case seriously from the start. He had me go through every detail multiple times, making sure they had everything they needed. On the 3rd day, they executed a search warrant on Mercer's van and property, an isolated spot about 15 miles off the highway. What they found still haunts me. The van had a hidden compartment with restraints, duct tape, and various weapons. But it was what they found at his house that made national news, a recently poured concrete floor in his workshop that, when broken up, revealed multiple bodies buried beneath. Mercer had been impersonating a highway patrol officer for years, using fake emergency lights to pull over lone travelers at night. He'd used the drug trafficking story as a pretext to get people out of their cars, then incapacitate them with a stun gun. He'd stage their vehicles with hazard lights on and belongings inside, knowing police would initially just log them as abandoned rather than treat them as crime scenes. They found Melissa Carver's body, along with Kyle Brennan, who had disappeared 6 weeks after her. There were 3 others, all matching unsolved disappearances from the past 5 years. Mercer confessed to everything after they found the bodies. He's serving 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, though investigators believe there may be more victims buried elsewhere in the desert. I think about those people every day. I think about how close I came to being one of them. If I hadn't asked to see his badge, if I hadn't floored it when I did, if that truck hadn't come along when it did, I'd be nothing but a missing persons report and an abandoned car. The case prompted Nevada to revise their abandoned vehicle protocols and start a public awareness campaign about verifying law enforcement identities. Trooper Reyes told me they now investigate any abandoned vehicle on that stretch immediately, rather than waiting the standard 48 hours. I still drive that highway sometimes. I ended up getting a job in Tonopah after all, but never at night and never alone. I keep a fully charged phone, extra battery pack, and a real emergency kit in my car. I've memorized the verification procedure for real highway patrol officers. Most importantly, I listen to my instincts. That night, something felt wrong from the moment those lights appeared in my mirror. Deep down, I knew it wasn't right. I just wish I'd trusted that feeling sooner. If you're ever driving alone at night and get pulled over, especially in a remote area, remember you have the right to verify an officer's identity. Keep your doors locked, crack your window only enough to communicate, and ask to see ID. A real officer will understand your caution. And if something feels wrong, if anything feels off, trust yourself. It might just save your life. It saved mine. Story 7. I still get chills writing this. I've kept quiet about what happened for 3 years now, but after seeing those missing persons reports last week, I can't stay silent anymore. Someone needs to know what's out there. It was October of 2019 when my friends Ashley, Brooke, and I decided to hike a remote section of the Appalachian Trail in Southwest Virginia. We weren't amateurs. All 3 of us had done multi-day hikes before. Ashley was practically raised in the woods by her park ranger dad. Brooke had thru-hiked the PCT the year before. And me, I'd been backpacking since I was 15. We had the right gear, we'd checked weather reports, and we'd filed our hiking plan with a trusted contact. The trailhead was already pretty empty when we arrived. End of season, cooling weather. The first day was perfect. Crisp air, golden leaves, that earthy smell of fall. We covered about 12 miles before starting to look for our planned shelter. The trail map showed a 3-sided shelter about half a mile ahead. When we reached it around 4 in the afternoon, we immediately noticed something off. 3 men were already there. Normally, that's no big deal. Shelters are first come, first served, and you just share or move on. But these guys, they didn't say a word when we approached. They just stared. All 3 of them sitting side by side on a log, barely blinking. "Hey there," I remember saying. "Room for 3 more?" Nothing, just stares. They weren't dressed like typical hikers. No technical gear, just worn clothes, heavy boots, and dirty canvas packs. One had a flannel shirt with the sleeves cut off despite the cool weather. Another wore a baseball cap pulled so low I could barely see his eyes. The third had a thick beard that hadn't been trimmed in months. Ashley stepped forward, always the friendly one. "Beautiful spot you found. We can set up nearby if you'd prefer to have the shelter." Still nothing, just this assessment, like they were sizing us up. Brooke grabbed my arm and whispered, "Let's go." I nodded, feeling a crawling sensation up my spine. "We'll head on. Happy trails," I called, trying to sound casual. As we walked away, I glanced back. All 3 were still staring, hadn't moved an inch. "That was weird as hell," Brooke said once we were out of earshot. "Maybe they're just antisocial," Ashley suggested, but I could tell she was unsettled too. We hiked another hour but didn't find another designated site. The sun was getting low, so we went off trail about a quarter mile to a small clearing I spotted. Not ideal. We prefer to stay on marked sites, but we needed somewhere to camp. The evening was uneventful. We cooked freeze-dried meals, hung our food bag from a tree away from camp, and crawled into our tent around 9. Despite being October, the night was mild. We left the rain fly off to see the stars through the mesh ceiling. I woke up at what must have been around 2 in the morning. At first I wasn't sure what had woken me. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling our tent. Not an animal. These were human footsteps, careful and measured. I froze, listening. The steps paused near the front of our tent. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. I reached over and gently shook Ashley awake, putting my finger to my lips. She immediately tensed up, hearing what I heard. "What is it?" Brooke whispered, stirring. "Someone's outside," I breathed. The footsteps started again, moving away slightly. I reached for my backpack, where I kept a small pistol. I'm licensed, and after a weird encounter on a previous hike, I never go into remote areas without it. I never thought I'd actually need to use it. "I'm going to look," I whispered. Ashley grabbed my arm. "Are you crazy? We can't just sit here." I unzipped the tent as quietly as possible and slipped out, gun held low. The moon was bright enough to see by. I scanned the clearing and caught movement, someone ducking behind a tree about 30 yards away. Then I noticed something else. There was more than one person. I could make out shapes moving in the tree line, circling our campsite. My mouth went dry. I backed toward the tent, keeping my eyes on the trees. "Get your shoes on," I hissed through the tent flap. "There are multiple people out here." "Should we call for help?" Brooke whispered. "No service," Ashley replied, checking her phone. I kept my back to the tent, watching the shadows. I saw one figure move to another tree, trying to stay hidden, but clearly watching us. The moonlight caught something in his hand, something long, maybe a stick or a weapon. "Hey!" I shouted, raising my gun so it was visible. "We see you! We're armed! Back off!" The figures went still. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, slowly, they retreated deeper into the darkness between the trees. I couldn't tell how many there were. 3, 4, more. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, wide awake, taking turns watching. By first light, we'd already packed up. It had to be those guys from the shelter. Ashley said, hands shaking as she rolled her sleeping bag. We should report this when we get back, Brooke added. Let's just focus on getting somewhere more populated, I said. We decided to abandon our planned route and head for the nearest road crossing, about 18 miles away. But after talking it through, we realized something worse. What if they were waiting for us back on the main trail? They'd seen which way we came from. We need to take a different route, I said, pulling out the map. There's another trail that connects about 5 miles ahead. It's longer, but it might be safer. We hiked fast, constantly looking over our shoulders. Every snapping twig made us jump. We reached the junction and took the alternate path, which wound through a more rugged section with steep ravines and dense forest. By late afternoon, we were exhausted but didn't want to stop. Finally, as daylight began to fade, we had no choice. We need to find somewhere really hidden, Ashley said. We discovered a small ravine with a flat area at the bottom, accessible only by scrambling down a steep slope. It was perfect, nearly impossible to spot from above with only one way in or out. We set up camp in near silence, skipping cooking to avoid smells that might attract attention. No one could find us here, Brooke whispered, trying to sound confident. I wasn't so sure, but I nodded anyway. That night we took shifts keeping watch. I had the middle shift from midnight to 3. Everything was quiet for the first hour. Then I heard it, the soft crunch of leaves from the top of the ravine. I woke Ashley and Brooke with a hand over their mouths. They found us, I breathed. We peered out through the mesh. At first I saw nothing. Then movement caught my eye, a pinprick of light about 50 yards away at the top of the ravine. Then another and another. 4 lights, barely visible, like someone using the dimmest setting on a headlamp. How did they find us? Brooke whispered, voice cracking. The lights started moving, spreading out along the ridge above us. Then one began picking its way down toward our position. They're coming down, I hissed. The moon emerged from behind clouds, and suddenly I could see them. 4 figures spaced along the top of the ravine, with one descending slowly toward us. The one coming down had something in his hand that caught the moonlight, a machete. Ashley grabbed the pistol from me. Without hesitation, she aimed high and fired a warning shot that echoed through the ravine. The figures froze. Then the one on the slope scrambled back up to rejoin the others. "Leave us alone," Ashley screamed, her voice bouncing off the ravine walls. The lights went out immediately. We couldn't see them anymore, but we knew they were still there. "We have to go now," I said, already stuffing my sleeping bag into my pack. We packed everything in under 3 minutes, leaving nothing behind. With Ashley in the lead, gun ready, we climbed out of the ravine on the opposite side from where we'd seen the figures. It was risky. We were using headlamps on the dimmest setting, trying not to trip as we scrambled up the steep incline. At the top, we paused to listen. Nothing. No lights, no sounds of pursuit. Not yet. "We don't stop until we hit civilization," Ashley said, jaw set. And we didn't. We hiked through the night, following the trail when we could see it, bushwhacking when we couldn't. When dawn broke, we were miles away, but we kept going. Our muscles screamed, blisters formed and burst, but fear pushed us forward. We hiked for nearly 36 hours straight, taking only brief breaks to refill water bottles and choke down energy bars. Finally, exhausted beyond belief, we reached a paved road. About 20 minutes later, a pickup truck approached. We flagged it down, probably looking like wild people with our dirty faces and terrified eyes. The elderly couple in the truck were hesitant at first, but must have seen our genuine fear. They drove us to the nearest police station where we filed a report. The officers were sympathetic but seemed skeptical. They sent a couple of deputies to check the area but found nothing conclusive, just some footprints around where our tent had been the first night, which could have been from any hikers. "Probably just locals trying to scare you," one officer suggested. "Halloween pranks." But I knew better. The way they moved, how they found us in that hidden ravine, the machete. These weren't pranksters. These were hunters, and we were their prey. I tried to put it behind me until last week, when I saw the news about two solo hikers who disappeared in the same section of trail. Search parties found nothing. No bodies, no abandoned gear, nothing. I keep thinking about those men at the shelter, how they just stared. I wonder how long they've been out there, watching hikers pass through their territory. I wonder what happens to the ones who don't notice they're being hunted until it's too late. I called the police again after seeing the news, but they just added my information to the case file, said there wasn't enough evidence to connect the disappearances to what happened to us. But I know, there's something out there in those woods, not ghosts or monsters, something worse. People who've let the isolation transform them into something inhuman. People who watch and wait and hunt. I still have nightmares about those lights in the darkness surrounding us, about what might have happened if Ashley hadn't fired that warning shot. Sometimes I wake up certain I can hear footsteps circling my house. I won't ever go back to that section of trail, but I worry about who will wander through there next, unaware they're being watched from the trees. Story 8. I still don't sleep well. It's been 6 months since that night at Black Hollow Lake, and I've moved twice since then. I jump at shadows, I keep my blinds closed, and I absolutely refuse to answer knocking at my door after dark. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks now. Part of me wants to forget it ever happened, but another part needs someone to know. Maybe writing it all down will help make sense of what happened that weekend. Or maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not crazy. It was supposed to be a fun getaway with my boyfriend Jake and our friends Claire and Matt. We'd been planning it for months, a long weekend at this secluded cabin by Black Hollow Lake. Jake found it on some rental site. It was about 3 hours from the city, deep in the woods, and the listing promised peaceful seclusion and a return to nature. The photos showed this charming rustic cabin with a wraparound porch facing a small lake, perfect for disconnecting from work and social media for a few days. We arrived Friday afternoon after a long drive down increasingly narrow roads. The last 7 miles were on a dirt road that twisted through dense forest. I remember joking with Claire in the back seat about how this was exactly how horror movies start, with 4 friends heading to a remote cabin. We laughed it off. God, I wish we'd turned around right then. The cabin itself was actually nicer than the pictures. 2 bedrooms, a loft, a stone fireplace, and that wraparound porch with a great view of the lake. The nearest neighbor was at least a mile away, according to the property manager, who'd left us a key under the mat and a note about how to work the generator if the power went out. The first few hours were perfect. We unpacked, cracked open some beers, and Jake grilled burgers on the deck while Matt tried to get the fireplace going. Claire and I explored the property a bit, finding a small dock extending into the lake. The water was incredibly still, almost glass-like, reflecting the pines and the gray sky perfectly. I remember thinking it looked like you could step right onto it, like it wasn't even water at all. After dinner, we played cards and drank wine around the fireplace. The mood was great. Around 9, Jake noticed we were running low on firewood for the night. "I'm gonna grab some more from that pile by the shed," he said, grabbing the flashlight from the counter. "Be right back." Such a normal moment, such ordinary words. I didn't even look up from my cards when he walked out. That's what haunts me most. I didn't even say goodbye. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Matt kept glancing at the door. "He's taking forever," Claire said, refilling her wine glass. "How far is this wood pile anyway?" After 20 minutes, I started to worry. "The shed's only like 50 feet from the back door," I said. "Something's wrong." Matt stood up, grabbing his phone for a flashlight. "I'll go check on him. He probably dropped the wood or something." I wanted to tell Matt to wait, that we should all go together, but I didn't. I let him walk out alone, too. Another mistake. Claire and I tried to keep playing cards, but neither of us was paying attention anymore. The minutes ticked by. 10, 15. Now both Jake and Matt were missing. "This isn't funny," Claire said, her voice tight. "If they're trying to scare us..." Jake wouldn't do that, I said, but my stomach was in knots. I went to the window, trying to see anything in the darkness outside. That's when I noticed the fog. It hadn't been foggy when we arrived, but now a thick mist had settled around the cabin. It looked wrong somehow, too dense, moving in slow swirls despite there being no wind. After 30 minutes with no sign of either of them, Claire and I couldn't wait any longer. We put on our jackets, grabbed the 2 remaining flashlights, and stepped out onto the porch. The air felt immediately different, colder, heavier somehow. Our flashlight beams barely penetrated the fog, creating eerie halos of light that extended maybe 15 feet before being swallowed by the mist. "Jake," I called. "Out." "Matt," Claire tried too, her voice cracking slightly. "Guys, this isn't funny. Come back." Our voices seemed to disappear into the fog, deadened like we were shouting into a pillow. No echo, no response. We made our way carefully toward the back of the cabin where the shed was. The fog was so thick I could barely see Claire, even though she was just a few feet away. Our flashlights created these weird pockets of visibility that made everything more disorienting. We found the shed. The woodpile was there, undisturbed. No sign that anyone had taken any logs, no footprints in the damp ground. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Where could they have gone?" That's when Claire grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises. "Emily," she hissed, "look." I followed her flashlight beam toward the edge of the trees, maybe 30 feet from where we stood. At first, I couldn't make out what she was pointing at, just a darker patch in the fog. Then it moved. It was tall, much taller than a person should be, and impossibly thin. It wore what looked like tattered black clothes that hung from its frame, but they moved wrong, like they were floating in water. The worst part was how it moved. It didn't walk. It glided, like its feet never touched the ground, drifting between the trees with a horrible smoothness that made my skin crawl. For a second, it paused. Even though I couldn't see a face in the darkness where its head should be, I felt it notice us, watching us, considering. Claire must have felt it too, because we both instinctively switched off our flashlights at the same moment. I grabbed her hand, and we backed away slowly, terrified of making any noise. When we reached the porch, we turned and ran inside, slamming the door behind us and locking it. "What the fuck was that?" Claire gasped, tears streaming down her face. I couldn't answer. My whole body was shaking so badly I could barely stand. I went around the cabin, making sure every door and window was locked. I pulled all the curtains closed except for a small gap in the living room where I could watch the yard. "We need to call someone," Claire said, grabbing her phone. No signal. Mine was the same. Of course, the listing had mentioned spotty cell service as a feature for those wanting to disconnect. "The landline," I said, suddenly remembering seeing an old corded phone in the kitchen. Claire ran to check it while I kept watching through the curtain gap. The fog seemed to be getting thicker, pressing against the windows like it wanted to seep inside. "Line's dead," Claire said, her voice hollow. "Just static." We sat in the living room, as far from the windows as possible, trying to figure out what to do. The fireplace had died down to embers, casting the room in dim, reddish light. "We need to leave," I said. "First light, we get in the car and we go for help." Claire nodded. "What about Jake and Matt?" I didn't have an answer. Part of me already knew we wouldn't find them. Around midnight, the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. Then silence. Claire and I froze, staring at each other in the dim light. 3 more knocks, slightly louder. "Jake?" I called out weakly, though I knew it wasn't him. "Emily?" came Matt's voice from outside the door. "Emily, can you let me in? I'm really cold out here." It sounded like Matt's voice, but wrong. Flat. Like someone reading words from a script without understanding their meaning. No emotion, no urgency, just empty words. "Matt?" Claire called, starting to rise. I grabbed her arm. "That's not Matt," I whispered. "Listen to his voice." "Claire," the voice called next. "Emily, please let me in. It's so cold out here." The words were right, but the voice remained emotionless, monotone, no shivering, no chattering teeth, despite claiming to be cold. "Where's Jake?" I called out, my voice shaking. A pause. Too long. "Jake's here too," the voice said finally. "We're both really cold. Please open the door." Claire was squeezing my hand so hard it hurt. "That's not them," she whispered. "Oh God, that's not them." The knocking came again, harder this time. Bang, bang, bang. "Open the door!" The voice was still Matt's, but distorted now, like multiple voices layered on top of each other, some higher, some lower than his natural tone. I pulled Claire away from the door, back toward the hallway leading to the bedrooms. The knocking stopped abruptly. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then came a soft tapping at the window beside the door. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't help it. I looked. Through the small gap in the curtains, I could see a face pressed against the glass. It looked like Matt, but his eyes were wrong, completely black, no whites at all, and he wasn't blinking. "Let us in," he whispered, his breath fogging the glass. "Let us in." I yanked the curtain closed and pulled Claire into the back bedroom, locking that door too. We pushed a dresser in front of it and huddled together on the bed, as far from the windows as possible. The tapping continued, moving from window to window around the cabin. Sometimes it was Matt's voice calling to us, sometimes Jake's, sometimes both together in that horrible layered way. Sometimes it was voices I didn't recognize at all, a child's voice, an old woman's, all asking to be let in. Around 3 in the morning, the voices stopped, the tapping stopped. Everything went silent. I don't know if it was exhaustion or terror, but somehow Claire managed to fall into a fitful sleep. I stayed awake, listening. The silence was almost worse than the knocking. Just before dawn, I heard something new, a soft sliding sound against the outside wall of the cabin, like something large being dragged slowly across the wood siding. It circled the entire cabin, pausing occasionally as if testing, searching. When the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, the sound stopped. I gently woke Claire. "We need to go," I whispered. "Now, while it's light." We moved the dresser silently and crept through the cabin. Everything looked normal in the pale morning light. No broken windows, no signs of anyone trying to get in. The fog had receded somewhat, though tendrils of it still drifted between the trees. We grabbed our keys and wallets, not bothering with anything else. When we opened the front door, I half expected to find Matt and Jake waiting on the porch. Instead, there was nothing. Just the empty yard, the silent lake, and the waiting forest. We ran to the car. The engine started on the first try, and we tore down the dirt road, tires spraying mud behind us. Neither of us spoke until we hit the main highway, almost 40 minutes later. We went straight to the nearest police station. The officers were sympathetic but skeptical. They sent out search parties that found nothing. No sign of Jake or Matt, no evidence of any struggle. The cabin was exactly as we'd left it. Their conclusion: our boyfriends had gotten lost in the woods, possibly while playing a prank on us. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. That thing in the woods wasn't human, and whatever came knocking at our door that night wasn't Jake or Matt anymore. I still don't know what happened to them. The police eventually called off the search. Their families still hold out hope they'll turn up someday. I haven't told them what really happened. How could I? Sometimes I dream about that lake, that perfect glassy surface that didn't look like water at all, and I wonder if maybe it wasn't. I don't know why it didn't take us too. Maybe it was waiting for us to open the door. Maybe it can only take you if you go willingly. Or maybe it just wasn't finished with Jake and Matt yet. All I know is I'm never going back to those woods. And if you ever find yourself in a cabin near Black Hollow Lake and hear knocking after dark, no matter whose voice is calling your name, don't answer, don't even look. Story 9. I still can't explain what happened to me 6 months ago. I've been to therapists, done research online, even joined paranormal forums trying to make sense of it, but nothing helps. I guess I'm sharing this now because keeping it bottled up is driving me crazy. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. It was mid-October and I was driving back from visiting my sister in Cedar Falls. I should have left earlier, but we got caught up talking, and before I knew it, it was already getting dark. No big deal, I thought. The drive was only supposed to be about 3 hours. About an hour into my trip, the sky opened up. I'm talking about the kind of rain where your windshield wipers can't keep up, even on the highest setting. My knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel so hard. The highway had practically emptied out. Seemed like everyone else had the good sense to pull over somewhere. I kept going though, mainly because there was nowhere to stop. This stretch of highway cuts through nothing but dense forest for miles. My GPS had lost signal about 20 minutes earlier, and my phone was down to 15% battery. Then came the moment I'd been dreading. My gas light blinked on. Panic started to set in. I was low on gas, had no GPS, my phone was dying, and I could barely see 10 feet ahead of me through the rain. Just when I was contemplating pulling onto the shoulder and waiting it out, I spotted something through the sheets of rain, a flickering neon light. As I got closer, I could make out the words Sunset Pines Motel with a smaller vacancy sign underneath it. I've never been so relieved to see a crappy roadside motel in my life. I slowed down and turned into what I thought was the entrance, my tires crunching on gravel. The place looked like something from the 70s that nobody had bothered to update. A single-story building with maybe 8 or 10 rooms stretching in a line, paint peeling off the wooden siding. The office was at one end, marked by a dim light. I parked as close as I could and made a run for it, still getting soaked in the process. The door had one of those bells that jingle when you open it. Inside, the place smelled musty, like old cigarettes and something else I couldn't place. The wallpaper, I think it had once been a floral pattern, was yellowed and peeling in the corners. Behind a small desk sat an older woman with thin gray hair pulled back in a bun. She didn't look up when I came in, just kept staring at what looked like a ledger book in front of her. I stood there dripping on the worn carpet for a moment before clearing my throat. Hi. Do you have a room available for tonight? She finally looked up and I had to stop myself from taking a step back. Her eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and seemed to look through me rather than at me. Her skin was papery thin with deep wrinkles around her mouth. Room 6, she said, her voice scratchy and unused. Without asking for ID or payment, she reached into a drawer and pulled out a key attached to a faded plastic tag with the number 6 on it. The key itself looked old and worn, like it had been used thousands of times. How much is the room? I asked, reaching for my wallet. You can settle up in the morning, she replied, pushing the key across the desk. I hesitated, then took it. The whole interaction felt off, but I was exhausted, and the storm outside was only getting worse. I could hear the rain hammering on the roof. Thanks. Is there anywhere around here to get something to eat? She just stared at me with those pale eyes, and after a moment I realized she wasn't going to answer. Okay then. Thanks again, I mumbled, backing toward the door. I sprinted back to my car and drove it down to the far end of the building where room 6 was located. The parking lot was empty except for my car, which struck me as odd. Where was the woman's car? And why was the vacancy sign on if all the rooms were empty? As I approached room 6, my uneasiness grew. The door had deep scratch marks on it, vertical lines that ran from about halfway up almost to the bottom. They looked like something had clawed at it repeatedly. I told myself it was probably just some drunk guest who'd lost their key, or maybe a dog that had been locked out. I unlocked the door and flipped on the light switch. A single bulb in a ceiling fixture flickered to life, casting harsh shadows across the room. It was basic. A queen-sized bed with a faded green bedspread, a small table with a lamp, an ancient TV that probably still had a VCR attached, and a door that I assumed led to the bathroom. The wallpaper in here matched the office, once floral, now yellowed and peeling, but it was the smell that hit me hardest, a sour metallic odor that made my nose wrinkle. It reminded me of pennies or blood mixed with something else, like meat that had been left out too long. I checked the bathroom first, thinking maybe there was a plumbing issue, but it seemed clean enough, if outdated. I went back to the car to grab my overnight bag and locked the door behind me once I was inside again. There was a chain lock, and I slid that into place too. I tried turning on the TV, but all I got was static on every channel. My phone was down to 10% now, and I still had no signal. The rain continued to pound on the roof, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the room through the thin curtains. I decided to try and get some sleep. After brushing my teeth and changing into a t-shirt and sweatpants, I got into bed. The sheets smelled musty but seemed clean. I don't know how long I lay there listening to the rain and trying to ignore the strange smell and the feeling that something wasn't right. The walls seemed to close in on me, and the ceiling felt lower than it should be. I kept telling myself I was just tired and stressed from driving in the storm. I must have dozed off at some point because I jerked awake suddenly, disoriented. The room was pitch black. The power must have gone out. It took me a moment to remember where I was. I reached for my phone to check the time. 2:14 in the morning. Battery at 5%. That's when I heard it. A scratching sound coming from the door. At first, it was so faint I thought it might be a tree branch brushing against the building. But there was a rhythm to it, deliberate, like someone dragging their nails down the door. Scratch, scratch, pause. Scratch, scratch, pause. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The scratching continued, growing louder and more insistent. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but my voice was stuck in my throat. I sat up in bed, clutching the sheets to my chest. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I strained my ears, trying to hear anything. Footsteps walking away, the sound of another door opening and closing. But there was nothing except the rain. Just as I was about to lie back down, convinced I'd imagined it, I heard the doorknob rattle. Someone, or something, was trying to open my door. Thank God I'd used the chain lock. The rattling stopped, and for a moment everything was still. Then I saw it. The door began to open slowly, the chain pulling taut with a quiet clink. The gap was only a few inches wide, but it was enough. Through that narrow space a hand appeared. Pale, skeletal, with long bony fingers and cracked yellowed nails. It wasn't a human hand. It couldn't be. The fingers were too long, the joints bent at unnatural angles. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I watched in horror as the hand gripped the edge of the door, the knuckles bulging beneath translucent skin. Then came a face, pressing into the gap, hollow, sunken eyes in a skull-like face, skin stretched thin over bone, lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing blackened teeth. Something inside me snapped. I scrambled backward off the bed, falling hard onto the floor. In the darkness, I crawled toward where I remembered the bathroom door was, my hands slapping against the carpet. Behind me, I heard the chain on the door straining, metal links scraping against metal. I found the bathroom, threw myself inside, and slammed the door shut, fumbling for the lock. There was no light in here either, just pitch blackness. I pressed my back against the door and slid down until I was sitting on the cold tile floor. Outside, I could hear movement in the room, a shuffling sound, like something being dragged across the carpet, then a thump against the bathroom door that made me jump. Whatever was out there, it knew where I was. I pressed my hands over my mouth to stifle a scream. The doorknob turned slowly, but the lock held. Another thump against the door, harder this time. I felt the wood vibrate against my back. Then came the scratching again, right at my ear level, nails dragging down the other side of the door. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark, listening to that thing scratch and thump against the door. My phone died at some point, leaving me with no way to tell time. I just kept my back pressed against the door, praying for morning to come. Eventually, the noises stopped. I stayed where I was, too terrified to move, certain that if I opened the door, that thing would be waiting for me. I must have fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion, because the next thing I knew, light was streaming through a small window high on the bathroom wall. I waited, listening. The room beyond the door was silent. After what felt like hours, I finally got up on shaky legs and, holding my breath, unlocked the bathroom door and pushed it open a crack. The room was empty. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, illuminating dust particles in the air. The bed was unmade where I'd jumped out of it, and my overnight bag sat, undisturbed, on the table. The door to the room was closed, the chain lock still in place. Had I dreamed the whole thing? I checked the main door. There were no new scratch marks beyond the ones I'd noticed when I arrived. Everything looked normal in the harsh light of day. I didn't care. I grabbed my stuff, unhooked the chain, and got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't stop at the office, didn't worry about paying. I just threw my bag in the car and peeled out of the parking lot. As I pulled back onto the highway, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The vacancy sign had changed to no vacancy. I swear to God, that motel had been empty except for me. I drove until I hit a gas station an hour later, my hands still shaking so badly I could barely pump the gas. I've tried to find that motel since then, even drove back along the same stretch of highway a month later. There was nothing there. No motel, no turnoff, nothing but trees on either side of the road. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if I had some kind of breakdown, or if the Sunset Pines Motel only exists for people who are desperate enough to need it. All I know is that I'll never pull over at a roadside motel again, no matter how bad the weather gets. Story 10. I still can't sleep without the lights on. It's been 3 months since I returned from what was supposed to be a relaxing work assignment on the MS Elysium, and I haven't been able to shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I've told bits and pieces to my closest friends, but I've never shared the full story until now. I need to get this off my chest, even if no one believes me. I'm a travel journalist, 42 years old and generally level-headed. I've been to 63 countries, stayed in everything from 5-star resorts to jungle huts, and nothing has ever rattled me like this. My editor assigned me to cover the maiden voyage of the MS Elysium, touted as the most technologically advanced luxury cruise liner ever built. The assignment was a gift after I'd been working non-stop for months. A Caribbean cruise with all expenses paid. Who would say no? The ship was magnificent. 22 decks, multiple infinity pools, restaurants run by Michelin-starred chefs, and staterooms that would make 5-star hotel suites look modest. My room was on deck 11 with a private balcony, rainfall shower, and a smart system that remembered my preferences for everything from room temperature to lighting intensity. The technology on board was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Digital walls that changed scenery based on your mood, AI-driven service robots that delivered room service, holographic entertainment that made you feel like you were actually part of the show. Boarding day in Miami was a spectacle. Champagne flowed freely, celebrities posed for photos, and everyone marveled at this floating palace. I spent that first day exploring, taking notes, shooting video, and interviewing excited passengers. The first night passed uneventfully, though I remember being surprised at how quiet the ship was, despite housing over 3,000 passengers and 1,000 crew. The soundproofing was exceptional. It was on the second night that things started to feel off. I was dining at Celestial, the ship's premier restaurant located at the bow with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic ocean views. Halfway through my entree, a perfectly cooked halibut, I felt a sudden, inexplicable chill, the kind that starts at the base of your spine and crawls upward. I looked around, wondering if someone had opened a door or if the air conditioning had malfunctioned, but everything seemed normal. The other diners continued their conversations. Glasses clinked, servers glided between tables. But something had changed. The lighting seemed dimmer somehow, the chatter more muted. When I looked out the windows, the stars had disappeared, replaced by an impenetrable darkness. Not just night sky, but a void. I blamed it on fatigue and too much wine. After dinner, I decided to return to my stateroom earlier than planned. The corridors were unusually quiet as I made my way back. Cruise ships are typically bustling with activity well into the night, but the Elysium's hallways were deserted. My footsteps echoed against the plush carpeting in a way that shouldn't have been possible. As I approached my room, I heard hushed voices speaking in what sounded like an old dialect I couldn't place. When I turned the corner, I caught a glimpse of shadows passing beneath my door, shadows that moved against the light, not with it. I quickened my pace, suddenly eager to be safely inside. My keycard beeped, the door unlocked, and I stepped inside, immediately closing the door behind me. My room was exactly as I'd left it, but it felt different, colder. The digital wall display was frozen on an image of a stormy sea, though I'd set it to display a tropical beach before leaving. I tried to shake off my unease by working on my article, but the Wi-Fi was spotty, cutting in and out. Strange for a ship that boasted the most advanced connectivity at sea. When I called guest services, no one answered. After several attempts, I decided to go to the front desk in person. The corridor outside my room was still eerily quiet. As I walked toward the elevators, I passed a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" that I hadn't noticed before. It was slightly ajar, with a faint blue light spilling out. Journalists' curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed it open further. Behind it was a stairwell descending into the bowels of the ship. These stairs weren't on any of the deck plans I'd studied. They were old-fashioned metal steps, rusted in places, completely at odds with the Elysium's ultra-modern aesthetic. The blue light came from emergency lighting that flickered intermittently. I should have turned back. Every instinct told me to, but I needed to understand what I was seeing. I began to descend, one careful step at a time, holding onto the railing which felt ice-cold beneath my fingers. The stairwell seemed to go down much further than should have been possible. I counted the flights, 6, 7, 8, far below where the lowest deck should have been. The air grew colder and damp with each step, carrying the scent of salt water and something else, something musty and old, like decaying paper. At the bottom, I emerged into a vast, dark room filled with maritime equipment that looked decades out of date. Analog radar screens, old-fashioned navigation tools, communications equipment from another era. Everything was covered in a thin film of salt, as if the sea itself had breathed on them. In one corner stood a filing cabinet, its drawers partially open. Inside were ship logs and photographs, hundreds of them. I pulled out one leather-bound logbook dated 1965 from a vessel called the Meridian. The handwriting inside was frantic, describing a sudden storm in the Atlantic and lights beneath the waves. Among the photographs was a portrait of a crew member in an old-fashioned uniform. The face was hauntingly familiar. I'd seen this person earlier that day, serving drinks by the pool. I was certain of it. But in this photo, the date stamp read April 15, 1965. My hands trembled as I flipped through more photographs, more familiar faces, passengers I'd spoken to, crew members who'd served me, all in photographs decades old. A cold breath on my neck made me whirl around. Standing before me was a spectral figure in a tattered captain's uniform, his face gaunt, eyes hollow pools of darkness. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. He reached toward me with translucent hands. "Help us," he whispered, his voice like water running over stones. "We are trapped." I stumbled backward, dropping the logbook. The figure dissolved into mist, but his words echoed in the cavernous space. I ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. When I reached the door and burst through it, I found myself not in the corridor where I'd entered, but in an entirely different part of the ship. I was in the crew area, sterile and functional compared to the passenger decks. A crew member passing by gave me a curious look but said nothing about my unauthorized presence. I asked him how to get back to the passenger area, trying to keep my voice steady. He pointed me toward a service elevator, his expression blank, eyes empty. That night, I barely slept. I tried telling myself I'd imagined it all, that perhaps I'd accidentally taken a sleep aid instead of my usual vitamins and had experienced some kind of waking dream. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. The next morning, the ship's atmosphere had changed. Passengers spoke in hushed tones at breakfast. I overheard fragments of conversation about people who had disappeared overnight. A couple was frantically speaking with guest services about their missing teenage son. A woman was in tears because her husband had vanished from their stateroom while she was in the shower. The crew maintained that no one was missing, that it was all a misunderstanding. They smiled too widely, spoke too mechanically. I noticed that the number of crew members seemed to have increased overnight. Many had that same hollow look in their eyes. I needed to know more. I returned to my room, locked the door, and pulled out my laptop. The internet was working again, but accessing anything beyond the ship's intranet was impossible. I searched the ship's digital library for information about the Meridian and found nothing. But when I searched the ship's architectural plans, I discovered something odd. The Elysium's hull incorporated materials from 7 different vessels, all of which had been lost at sea in the Bermuda Triangle region. It was billed as upcycling and historical preservation, but something about it felt wrong, very wrong. That afternoon, I found more hidden access points throughout the ship. Doors that shouldn't exist leading to corridors that weren't on any deck plan. I followed one that led me to a chamber filled with maritime relics, ship wheels, compasses, sextants, and portraits of captains from various eras. Their eyes seemed to follow me as I moved through the room. In the center stood a large sea chest, locked with an ancient padlock. Using a hairpin, I managed to pick it open, a skill I'd learned on an assignment in Eastern Europe years ago. Inside were journals dating back to the 18th century, all describing the same waters we were currently sailing through, all ending with accounts of mysterious lights, sudden storms, and inexplicable failures of navigation equipment. The final journal, dated 2 years prior, contained architectural plans for the Elysium. Handwritten notes in the margins revealed the horrifying truth. The ship had been deliberately built over the salvaged remains of vessels lost in the Bermuda Triangle, using materials that were conducive to spectral energy. It was designed as a vessel to contain the souls lost at sea, a floating prison bound by ancient curses and modern technology. As I read these words, the lights flickered, the temperature plummeted. Around me, ghostly figures began to materialize, men, women, and children in clothing from different eras, their faces twisted in silent screams. They reached out toward me, their touches like ice against my skin. I ran, clutching the journal, desperate to find someone, anyone, who would believe me. But as I raced through the corridors, I realized the ship was changing. Modernist decor morphed into older styles before my eyes. Sleek digital displays flickered to reveal aged wood and brass beneath. The ship was revealing its true nature. The few passengers I encountered seemed oblivious, their eyes glazed, movements mechanical. When I grabbed one woman's arm, trying to warn her, her skin felt cold and slightly, not solid, like touching dense fog. She smiled at me with empty eyes and said, "Isn't it wonderful? We never have to leave." The ship's systems began to malfunction. Lights surged and died. The engines made sounds like screaming. Over the PA system, which had been playing gentle background music, came the sounds of crashing waves and distant, inhuman wailing. I made my way to the bridge, fighting against corridors that seemed to stretch and contract. The captain and officers stood at their stations, unmoving, staring out at the endless sea. When I approached them, they turned as one, their faces the same as the ghostly captain I'd seen in the lower decks. "You don't belong here," the captain said, his voice echoing as if coming from underwater. "But you will." I backed away, then turned and fled. Somehow, I managed to reach the communications room. The radio operator sat slumped over his equipment, cold to the touch. I pushed him aside and sent out a mayday call, giving our coordinates and begging for help. To my shock, someone responded. The Coast Guard had already been tracking us. The Elysium had veered dramatically off course and was not responding to any hails. They were sending vessels to intercept. I barricaded myself in the radio room as the ship grew colder, as the walls seemed to breathe and the floor pulsed beneath my feet. The ghostly figures gathered outside the door, their whispers a constant, maddening chorus. Hours later, rescue arrived. The Elysium was towed back to Miami, declared a ghost ship after most of its passengers and crew were found in a state of confused delirium, unable to recall the past several days. Some were never found at all. The official explanation was mass hallucination caused by a gas leak. The Elysium was decommissioned, never to sail again, but I know the truth. I have the journal, though its pages have begun to crumble, the text fading as if being erased by an invisible hand. Sometimes at night I hear whispers from the ocean calling me back. I've moved inland as far from the sea as I could get. But distance doesn't matter. They know I'm the one who got away, the one who knows their secret. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I catch a glimpse of something behind me, the shadow of a ship that should not exist, and the faces of those still trapped within it. Story 11. I still can't believe it's been 3 months since it happened. I've tried telling this to the police multiple times, but they just look at me like I'm making it up or suffering from trauma-induced delusions. Maybe writing it down will help me process it, or maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not crazy. I'm Emily, I'm 17, and I used to love being home alone. My parents are super involved with this local charity that helps homeless families, and they attend these fancy fundraiser things downtown like twice a month. I always looked forward to these nights, ordering whatever food I wanted, watching whatever I wanted without Mom commenting on the inappropriate content, just having the whole house to myself. But after what happened that night in October, I haven't spent a single night alone. I can't even be in a room by myself without checking over my shoulder every few seconds. It was one of those stereotypical stormy nights. I know how that sounds, but it really was pouring outside. The rain was hammering against the windows, and the wind was making this howling noise through the trees in our backyard. Mom and Dad had left around 6 for some fancy gala downtown, and they wouldn't be back until at least midnight. My 13-year-old brother Max was supposedly at a sleepover at his friend Tyler's house, so I had the place completely to myself. I decided to take advantage. By watching this horror movie everyone at school had been talking about, something my parents definitely wouldn't approve of. I made some popcorn, turned off most of the lights, and curled up on the couch with a blanket. About halfway through the movie, right during this really tense scene, I heard it for the first time. A scratching sound coming from the front of the house. At first, I thought it was just a tree branch scraping against the siding or something. Our house is in this suburban neighborhood called Ravenwood, with lots of old trees everywhere. But then I heard it again, and it sounded more deliberate, like someone was dragging their nails across our front door. I paused the movie and just sat there frozen, straining to hear over the sound of the rain. After a few seconds of silence, the scratching started again. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. I told myself it was probably just a raccoon or something, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was intentional. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, then slowly made my way to the front door. The peephole showed nothing but darkness and rain. I stood there for what felt like forever, listening, but the scratching had stopped. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just my imagination getting the better of me after watching half a horror movie. I was walking back to the living room when I saw it. A face pressed against the window next to our front door. Not just any face, it was pale, almost glowing in the darkness, with these wide, unblinking eyes and a smile that stretched way too far across its face. It wasn't natural. The way the mouth curved upward at the corners looked physically impossible. I screamed and dropped my phone, the flashlight beam spinning across the floor. When I looked back up, the face was gone. I scrambled to pick up my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I ran back to the living room, tripping over the coffee table and spilling, my popcorn everywhere. I tried calling my parents, but the call wouldn't go through. The storm must have been affecting the cell service. I tried texting, but the messages just sat there with those little pending icons. I even tried calling 911 but got nothing, not even a ring. Just silence, like the phone wasn't even working. Then the scratching started again, but this time from the back door. I don't know what possessed me to investigate instead of hiding, but I think part of me was hoping it really was just an animal. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer and slowly made my way to the back of the house. The scratching got louder as I approached, but when I finally got to the door and looked out through the glass panel, there was nothing there. I flipped on the porch light and peered out into the yard. The rain was coming down in sheets, but I could still make out the edge of the woods behind our property. And that's when I saw it, a dark shape moving between the trees. Not like an animal, like a person, but the way it moved was wrong. Too fluid, almost like it was gliding rather than walking. I ran back inside and locked every door and window in the house. I was trying to figure out what to do next when a horrible thought hit me. Max. What if he'd come home early from his sleepover? What if he was upstairs in his room right now, completely unaware of what was happening? I called out his name, but there was no answer over the sound of the storm. I grabbed the knife again and slowly made my way upstairs, checking each room. When I got to Max's bedroom, the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw his bed was unmade, like someone had been in it. Max was supposed to be at Tyler's. He wasn't supposed to be home, but his backpack was on the floor, and his phone charger was plugged in next to his bed. "Max?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. That's when I heard it, a muffled cry coming from downstairs. Not from the living room or kitchen, but from below them. From the basement. Our basement had always creeped me out. It was unfinished, with concrete floors and walls and these old pipes that made weird noises. Dad used it for storage, and there was a small workshop area where he kept his tools. Max and I weren't supposed to go down there alone, especially since the light switch was at the bottom of the stairs, meaning you had to walk down into complete darkness before you could see anything. But if Max was down there, I had to go. I stood at the top of the basement stairs, knife clutched in my trembling hand, my phone's flashlight providing the only illumination. The cry came again, definitely Max's voice, and it was coming from the far corner of the basement. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs, each creaking step sending another jolt of fear through me. When I reached the bottom, I fumbled for the light switch and flipped it on. The fluorescent lights flickered to life, revealing the cluttered space. "Max," I called out, a little louder this time. "Emily?" His voice was small and frightened, coming from behind some storage boxes in the corner. I rushed over and found him huddled on the floor, his knees pulled up to his chest, his face streaked with tears. "Max, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be at Tyler's." "Tyler got sick," he said, his voice shaking. "His mom dropped me off an hour ago. I came inside and was watching videos in my room when the power flickered, and I heard someone walking around upstairs. I thought it was you, but then I heard this weird scratching noise and I got scared and hid down here." The power had never gone out for me, and I'd been upstairs. There wasn't anyone else walking around. Before I could process what that meant, Max's eyes widened, focusing on something behind me. "Emily," he whispered, "someone's watching us." I whirled around, the knife outstretched in front of me, but I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Standing at the bottom of the stairs was a figure in a dark hooded coat. Water dripped from the fabric onto the concrete floor, forming small puddles. The hood was pulled so far forward that I couldn't see a face, just darkness where features should have been. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to sound brave despite the terror coursing through me. "Get out of our house right now." The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, completely still, water continuing to drip from its clothing. Then, slowly, it raised a hand toward us. The sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing skin that was unnaturally pale, almost translucent, with what looked like dark veins visible beneath the surface. I pushed Max behind me. "Stay back, I have a knife." The figure tilted its head, like it was studying us with curiosity. Then it spoke, in a voice that sounded like multiple people talking at once, with this weird echo effect that made my skin crawl. "You shouldn't be here," it said. "Neither of you should be here." "This is our house," I shouted, my voice breaking. The figure took a step forward, and I noticed something strange. It didn't seem to be walking normally. Its movements were jerky, almost like those old stop-motion films. "No," it replied. "This house has always been mine. You're just temporary guests." That's when the lights went out completely. My phone's flashlight was still on, but the beam seemed to be swallowed by the darkness surrounding the figure. I could hear Max whimpering behind me, and I gripped the knife tighter, though I had no idea if it would do any good against whatever this was. The figure moved toward us, faster now, covering the distance between us in what seemed like an impossible amount of time. Before I could react, a cold, wet hand grabbed my wrist with inhuman strength. The knife clattered to the floor. Its grip was like ice, and where it touched me, my skin went numb. I could feel something seeping from its hand into mine, like a cold liquid working its way under my skin. "It's all over now," it whispered, its voice right next to my ear, even though the hooded head was still in front of me. "You've seen me, and now I've seen you." I don't remember much after that. The darkness seemed to expand, swallowing everything, including my consciousness. The last thing I recall is Max screaming my name and a sensation like being pulled underwater. When I woke up, I was in the woods behind our house, Max unconscious beside me. We were both soaking wet, even though we were under a thick canopy of trees that should have sheltered us from the rain. There was no sign of the hooded figure. We stumbled back to the house to find our parents had called the police when they returned home to an empty house with the front door wide open. According to them, they'd found the living room in disarray, the popcorn spilled, the TV still on, but no sign of a break-in or struggle. The police think we ran away for some reason and got lost in the woods. My parents think the horror movie scared me, and I had some kind of panic attack and convinced Max to hide in the woods with me. The doctors suggested I might have experienced a stress-induced dissociative episode. Nobody believes what really happened. They say there were no footprints in the mud around our house except ours, no evidence of anyone else being there. But I know what I saw. I know what grabbed me. The weirdest part, there's now a mark on my wrist where it grabbed me, a pattern of dark veins just beneath the skin in the exact shape of a hand. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I still hear scratching at the doors. And when I look out the window at night, I swear I can see a pale face watching me from the edge of the woods, its mouth stretched into that impossible smile. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it let us go. But I know it's still out there, waiting. And sometimes when the house is quiet, I hear that voice again. "You've seen me, and now I've seen you." Story 12. I still can't sleep right. Been almost 3 months since it happened, but every time I close my eyes, I see those hollow eyes staring back at me. I've been driving trucks for 20 years now. 20 damn years on America's highways, and nothing, I mean nothing, ever prepared me for what I saw on Route 93 that night. Look, I'm not some guy who believes in ghosts or any of that paranormal crap. I'm just a regular trucker, hauling loads from A to B and trying to make a decent living. My name's Marcus, and until February 12th of this year, the scariest thing I'd ever encountered on the road was a drunk driver swerving into my lane outside of Tulsa. That night started like any other long haul. I was taking a load of scrap metal from Reno down to Phoenix. It was a decent paying gig, and I needed the money after my transmission went out last month. The dispatcher had me leaving late, around 10 in the evening, which meant I'd be hitting the most desolate stretch of 93 in the dead of night. No big deal, I thought. I've done night drives 1,000 times. The first few hours were uneventful. The cab of my Freightliner was warm. I had a thermos of coffee, and I was listening to some old Merle Haggard to keep me company. Around 1:30 in the morning, I crossed the state line into Nevada. That's when the radio started acting funny. My CB had been quiet most of the night, not unusual for that time. But suddenly, there was this burst of static that made me jump, then silence again. I figured it was just interference. You get that sometimes in the mountains. But then it happened again, louder this time, followed by what sounded like breathing. "Hello? Anybody out there?" I said into the mic, thinking maybe it was another trucker trying to reach out. Nothing for a minute. Then a voice came through so clearly it was like they were sitting next to me. "Pull over, driver." The voice was wrong somehow. It sounded hollow, like someone talking through a long metal pipe. It had this weird echo to it that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Who's this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You got a handle, good buddy?" More static then. "Pull over, I need help." Something about the way they said help made my stomach knot up. The words stretched out too long, like they were savoring it. "Where you at?" I asked, scanning the road ahead. Route 93. At that point is just a two-lane blacktop cutting through miles of empty desert. My headlights showed nothing but asphalt and scrub brush stretching to the horizon. No response this time, just more of that breathing, slower now. I switched the CB off. Probably just some lot lizard or drunk local messing with passing truckers. Wouldn't be the first time, but I couldn't shake this feeling of unease that had settled over me. About 15 minutes later, I noticed headlights in my rear view. They were far back, but gaining. Not unusual, except I hadn't seen another vehicle for at least 45 minutes. As the lights got closer, I could make out the silhouette of a big rig, a Peterbilt from the looks of it, an older model, maybe from the 80s. The truck kept pace behind me for a few miles, staying about 100 yards back. Then, without warning, it accelerated and pulled alongside me. I glanced over, expecting to see another driver giving a friendly wave or something, but what I saw instead made my blood run cold. There was nobody behind the wheel. The cab was empty. I blinked hard, thinking I must be more tired than I realized. When I looked again, the truck was still there, still keeping perfect pace with me at 70 miles per hour, and still with no one driving it. The Peterbilt was old and rusted, with faded red paint peeling off in strips. Its headlights had this yellowish tint, like nicotine-stained fingers. But what really got me was the way it was. I don't know how to describe it exactly. It was like it wasn't fully there, like I could almost see through parts of it. I hit the gas, pushing my rig up to 80. The Peterbilt kept pace effortlessly. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it shot ahead of me and vanished around a bend in the road. My heart was hammering in my chest. I told myself I was just tired, that my eyes were playing tricks on me. I took a swig of coffee and turned Merle up louder, trying to drown out the thoughts in my head. When I rounded that same bend a few seconds later, the road ahead was empty. No taillights, nothing. The Peterbilt had vanished completely. Relief washed over me. Just my imagination after all, I thought. Then my CB radio crackled to life again, even though I'd switched it off. "Coming for you, driver." The voice was even more distorted now, a raspy whisper that seemed to scratch at my eardrums. I jabbed at the power button, but the radio stayed on, hissing static. "Who the fuck is this?" I shouted into the mic. "This ain't funny, asshole." The response was laughter, if you could call it that. It was more like the sound of dry leaves being crushed underfoot, a brittle crunching noise that went on too long. I yanked the CB's power cord right out of the dash. The radio went dead instantly, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands were shaking so bad, I had to grip the wheel tighter to keep steady. About 5 miles down the road, I spotted something that shouldn't have been there. The Peterbilt parked sideways across both lanes, blocking the highway completely. I hit the brakes, tires screaming as 40 tons of truck and cargo tried to stop from 60 miles per hour. For a sickening moment, I thought I wasn't going to make it, that I was going to plow right into the side of that rusted-out Phantom. But I managed to stop with maybe 10 feet to spare. The Peterbilt just sat there, engine idling. Its headlights illuminated swirls of dust in the desert air, and now I could see it clearly. It wasn't just old and rusted. It looked like it had been through hell. The windshield was shattered in a spiderweb pattern. The chrome was blackened like it had been in a fire. And there was something wrong with the proportions, like it had been crushed and then pulled back into shape by someone who didn't quite know what a truck was supposed to look like. I sat there, engine running, frozen with indecision. There was no way around. Steep ditches lined both sides of the road. I couldn't back up easily with my trailer. I was trapped. Then, slowly, the driver's door of the Peterbilt swung open. Something started climbing out. Not climbing, unfolding. Like its limbs were too long, too jointed in all the wrong places. I couldn't see it clearly at first, just a silhouette backlit by those sickly yellow headlights. But as it stepped fully out of the cab and into the pool of my own headlights, I saw it in nauseating detail. It had the basic shape of a man, but that's where any resemblance to humanity ended. It was too tall, too thin, like someone had taken a normal person and stretched them on a rack. Its skin was a waxy gray-white, stretched too tight over visible bones. But its face, Jesus, its face is what still wakes me up screaming. Where eyes should have been, there were just empty sockets, deep and black like holes punched in dirty ice. But somehow, I could feel it looking at me. Its mouth was all wrong too wide, with thin lips pulled back to reveal teeth that were filed to points. It started walking toward my truck. Not walking, gliding almost. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a damaged VHS tape where frames are missing. With each step, it covered more ground than should have been possible. I fumbled for my phone, thinking I'd call for help, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. I was in the middle of nowhere, Nevada, at 2 in the morning, being approached by something that shouldn't exist. When it was about 20 feet from my truck, it stopped. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, nearly touching its own shoulder. Then it smiled, that mouth stretching wider than any human mouth could, revealing row after row of those needle-like teeth. It spoke, and somehow I heard it clearly through my closed windows. "Been waiting for you, Marcus." It knew my name. How the fuck did it know my name? Something in me snapped. Pure animal panic took over. I threw my truck into reverse, not caring about the damage I might do to my trailer. The thing's smile widened even further, literally ear to ear now, as I frantically backed up. It started moving again, faster this time, covering ground in those strange, stuttering movements. I kept backing up, watching in horror as it gained on me. Then I hit a pothole that jolted the whole truck. When my eyes refocused on the road ahead, the thing was gone. So was the Peterbilt. The road was completely empty. I sat there gasping for breath, sweat pouring down my face despite the February chill. Had I hallucinated the whole thing? Was I losing my mind? Then I noticed something on the passenger seat that hadn't been there before. A rusty, old-fashioned CB microphone caked with what looked like dried blood. I screamed then. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I screamed like a child and threw that thing out the window as hard as I could. Then I floored it, not caring about speed limits or road safety or anything except getting the hell away from there. I drove non-stop to the next town, some little place called Alamo, and pulled into the first gas station I saw. The teenage clerk looked alarmed when I burst in, probably because I looked like I'd seen the devil himself. Hell, maybe I had. I called my dispatcher and told him I was sick, that I needed to stop for the night. He wasn't happy, but I didn't care. I got a room at a motel across the street and double-locked the door. I didn't sleep a wink that night, just sat in a chair facing the door with my knife in hand. The next morning, in the harsh light of day, I almost convinced myself it had been some kind of waking dream. Sleep deprivation can do weird things to your mind, right? But then I noticed something when I went back to my truck. Scratch marks down the driver's side. Deep gouges in the metal like something had been trying to claw its way in. I finished that delivery to Phoenix, and I've done a few more routes since then, but I refuse to drive Route 93 again, no matter how much they offer to pay me. And I never, ever use my CB radio after dark anymore. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, I think I catch glimpses of yellow headlights in my rearview mirror. And sometimes, even with my radio off, I hear faint whispers coming through the speakers. See you soon, Marcus. I don't know what that thing was on Route 93. I don't know why it chose me or what it wanted. All I know is it's still out there, waiting on that lonely stretch of Nevada highway. And somehow, deep in my bones, I know our paths will cross again. Story 13. Last Halloween still haunts me. I've tried to rationalize what happened that night, tried to convince myself it was just the fog playing tricks on us, but I know deep down what we experienced wasn't normal. I'm finally sharing this because I need someone else to know, even if no one believes me. I live in Maplewood, a small town in New England where fog is pretty common, especially in the fall. But last Halloween, the fog was different, thicker, almost alive somehow. I had gone to a Halloween party in Bedford, the next town over, with my friends Jake and Sarah. Nothing crazy, just a get-together at our mutual friend's place. We'd had a few drinks, I stuck to 2 beers since I was driving, ate some snacks, watched a horror movie. Normal Halloween stuff. We left around 11:30 at night. The fog had already started rolling in when we arrived at the party, but by the time we left, it had become this massive, dense blanket covering everything. I remember Jake joking about it being perfect Halloween weather as we walked to my car. I laughed it off, but something about that fog made me uneasy right from the start. It seemed to swallow the streetlights, turning them into these eerie, diffused glows that barely penetrated a few feet. "You good to drive in this?" Sarah asked as we got into my old Honda Civic. "Yeah, I know these roads like the back of my hand," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The drive back to Maplewood usually takes about 30 minutes, and I've done it hundreds of times. But as I pulled away from the curb, I immediately felt disoriented. The fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead, even with my high beams on. If anything, the high beams made it worse. The light just reflected back at us. I slowed down to maybe 20 miles per hour, leaning forward in my seat, squinting to make out the road. Jake and Sarah were quiet in the back, probably sensing my tension. The radio was playing some late-night talk show, but it kept cutting in and out with static. About 10 minutes into our drive, I realized I couldn't recognize any landmarks. The fog had transformed the familiar route into something alien and uncertain. I should have seen the old oak tree that marks the halfway point between Bedford and Maplewood, but there was nothing but that impenetrable white wall ahead and around us. "This fog is insane," Jake muttered from the back seat. "I can't even see the houses we're passing." That's when I noticed something weird. We should have been passing houses. This stretch of road was lined with them, but I couldn't make out a single porch light or driveway through the fog. It was as if we were driving through empty space. The radio static grew louder, the voices of the late-night hosts completely overtaken by harsh white noise. I reached to turn it off, but before I could, the static cleared for a moment. A woman's voice came through, not the radio host, but something different. Her voice was urgent, almost desperate. "Turn back before it's too late," she said, the words cutting through the static like a knife. "They're coming. Turn back now." Sarah leaned forward from the back seat. "What the hell was that?" I tried to laugh it off. Probably just some Halloween radio special. But my mouth had gone dry, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the voice wasn't part of any program. The static returned, louder than before, then cut out completely as the radio died. I tried turning it back on, but nothing happened. That's when I saw it. The first figure. On the right side of the road, standing completely motionless, was a person. At least, it looked like a person at first glance. Tall and gaunt, wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothes, a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat. The fog seemed to part slightly around them, as if repelled. As we drove past, I realized they were staring directly at our car, head turning slowly to follow our movement. I couldn't make out a face beneath that hat, just darkness where features should have been. "Did you guys see that?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "See what?" Jake asked, but the way he said it, quiet and strained, made me think he had seen something too. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my palms sweating despite the chill in the car. The fog pressed against the windows like something solid, and the headlights barely cut through it. I was driving almost blind now, following what I hoped was still the road. "Check your phones," I said. "See if we can use GPS to figure out where we are." Sarah pulled out her phone, and I heard her sharp intake of breath. "It's not working. The screen is just static, like an old TV." She held it up for me to see in the rearview mirror. The screen was indeed filled with black and white noise, except for the time displayed at the top, 12:05 a.m. Jake checked his phone too. Mine's doing the same thing. I pulled mine out at the next straightaway, keeping one hand on the wheel. Same thing, static, with the time frozen at 12:05 a.m. A cold dread settled in my stomach. My phone's battery was at 100%, which made no sense because it had been at 60% when we left the party. That's when the fog ahead seemed to shift. It wasn't just random swirls anymore. It was like it was forming shapes, human-like shapes, dozens of them lining both sides of the road ahead. "Do you see that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, unable to speak. As we drove closer, the shapes became clearer. They were people, or something like people. Their proportions were wrong, limbs too long, torsos too narrow. They stood perfectly still, faces hidden beneath the fog, but somehow I could feel them watching us. I tried to turn the wheel, to veer onto another road, any road that would take us away from those figures, but the steering wheel wouldn't budge. It was as if the car was being pulled forward on a track. "What's happening?" Jake's voice had risen in panic. "Why aren't you turning around?" "I can't." I struggled with the wheel. "It won't move." As we moved closer, the figures began to sway slightly, like trees in a gentle breeze, except there was no breeze. The air outside was dead still. Their movements were synchronized, unnatural. And then, as if responding to some signal I couldn't perceive, they began to move toward the road, toward us. Sarah screamed. The sound jolted through me like an electric shock. I stomped on the brake pedal, but the car didn't slow. If anything, it seemed to accelerate slightly. The figures were at the edge of the road now. I could make out more details. Their clothes were old and tattered, hanging off their elongated frames. Their heads were bowed, faces still hidden, but they seemed to be looking directly at us somehow. "What do they want?" Jake's voice was a terrified whisper now. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had closed up with fear. The car continued forward, drawing us closer to those waiting figures. They began to reach out with impossibly long, pale arms. In desperation, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal instead. To my surprise, the car responded, lurching forward with a roar. We shot past the first line of figures, their hands seeming to brush against the car as we passed. The temperature inside dropped dramatically. I could see my breath fogging in front of me. More figures appeared in the headlights, but I kept my foot pressed hard on the accelerator. The car engine whined in protest as we barreled down the road. I had no idea if we were still on the right path or even on a road at all. For all I knew, we could have been heading straight into a ditch or a tree, but anything seemed better than stopping near those things. "They're following us." Sarah was looking out the back window, her face pale with terror. I didn't dare look in the rear-view mirror. I just drove, hands clenched so tight on the steering wheel that my knuckles were white, foot pressing the gas pedal to the floor. The fog seemed to be getting thicker, pressing against the windows like it wanted to get in. The car's interior lights flickered, and for a moment, I was sure we were going to be plunged into darkness. What felt like hours passed, though it couldn't have been more than minutes. My eyes strained against the fog, desperately searching for any familiar landmark. The radio crackled back to life suddenly, making all three of us jump. The woman's voice returned, clearer now. "They almost have you. Run. Don't look back." Then it died again, leaving us in silence broken only by our panicked breathing. Suddenly, the fog began to thin, just slightly at first, then more noticeably. I could see farther ahead, make out the actual road. My hands regained control of the steering wheel. The car's engine stopped its stressed whining and settled back into its normal hum. And then, like passing through a curtain, we broke free of the fog entirely. The road ahead was clear under a starlit sky. I recognized where we were, less than a mile from my house, but nowhere near the route we should have taken from Bedford. I pulled over immediately, my whole body shaking. We sat in silence for a long moment, all of us trying to process what had just happened. "What the hell was that?" Jake finally whispered. I shook my head. I don't know. Sarah was still staring out the back window. The fog, it's just sitting there, like it's waiting. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw she was right. The fog bank we'd emerged from wasn't behaving like normal fog. It had a distinct edge, like a wall, and it wasn't dissipating or moving with the light breeze. It just waited. I started the car again and drove us to my house. None of us wanted to be alone that night, so Jake and Sarah crashed in my living room. We barely spoke about what happened, as if putting it into words would make it more real somehow. The next morning, the fog was gone, and in the harsh light of day, we tried to convince ourselves it had been some kind of shared hallucination. Maybe someone had spiked the punch at the party. Maybe we'd all been more tired than we realized. But our phones told a different story. All three had the same unexplainable damage. The screens would occasionally fill with static, especially when trying to use navigation apps. And they all had the same glitch. Every night at 12:05 a.m., they freeze for exactly 1 minute before resuming normal function. We've drifted apart since that night. It's like we can't bear to be around each other because it forces us to acknowledge what happened. But every October when the fog rolls in, I swear I can hear that woman's voice in the static of my radio, warning me. And I know those figures are still out there in the fog, waiting. I don't drive at night anymore, especially not on Halloween, because I'm afraid that next time we won't be able to outrun them. Story 14. I've been driving trucks for almost 20 years now, seen pretty much everything you can imagine on the road. Deer jumping out, drunk drivers swerving across lanes, even had a mattress fly off someone's pickup right in front of me once. But what happened last October on Highway 93 in Nevada? I still can't explain it, and I still get a knot in my gut whenever dispatch tells me I'm headed that way again. For those who don't know, Highway 93 cuts through Nevada like a lonely ribbon. Local drivers call it the highway to hell, not just because it leads to Vegas, but because of how desolate and dangerous it can be. No lights, minimal traffic, and miles of nothing but desert and mountains. Beautiful during the day, but at night, different story entirely. I was hauling a load of electronics from Idaho down to a distribution center in Vegas. Good paying gig, tight schedule. Left Boise later than I wanted because of loading delays, so I was pushing the limits of my hours to make up time. It was around 11:30 at night when I hit the stretch between Wells and Ely. Crystal clear night, temperature dropping fast like it does in the desert. Moon was bright enough that you could see the outline of the mountains against the sky. The road was completely empty. Hadn't seen another vehicle for at least 40 minutes. I had the radio on low, some classic rock station that was starting to break up with static as I got deeper into the emptiness. I remember checking my GPS, calculating if I should push through or find somewhere to rest, when I saw her, just standing there on the shoulder. A woman in a white dress. It happened so fast I almost thought I imagined it, but I didn't. She was maybe 50 feet ahead of my truck, standing completely still on the side of the road, long dark hair hanging down, covering most of her face. The white dress stood out like a beacon against the darkness. I slowed a bit, thinking maybe she needed help. Who the hell would be out there in the middle of nowhere at this hour? But something felt off. She didn't move at all, didn't turn her head as I approached, didn't wave, nothing. Just stood there like a statue. I passed her going maybe 50 miles per hour, and I swear the temperature in my cab dropped about 20 degrees. I looked in my side mirror to see if she was trying to flag me down from behind, but there was nothing there, just empty road. She had completely vanished. I'm not the type to scare easy. Like I said, 20 years on the road, you see some strange things. I figured maybe she'd stepped back into the brush, or maybe I was more tired than I thought. Played some mind tricks on myself. I cranked the AC to wake myself up, took a swig of cold coffee, and kept driving. Couldn't have been more than 10 minutes later when I saw her again. Only this time she wasn't on the shoulder. She was standing directly in the middle of my lane. I slammed on the brakes instinctively. Let me tell you, stopping 80,000 pounds on a dime isn't something that happens. The tires screamed against the asphalt, the load shifted in the trailer, and I felt the rig trying to jackknife. My knuckles went white on the wheel as I fought to keep it straight. The whole time she didn't move an inch, just stood there waiting for me to hit her. Somehow, I managed to stop about 15 feet in front of her. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The headlights illuminated her fully now, and what I saw still gives me nightmares. Her dress wasn't just white, it was filthy, torn in places. Her hair wasn't just covering her face, it was matted, wild, like it hadn't been brushed in years. And through the strands, I could see one eye staring directly at me. Not panicked, not scared of nearly being hit by a semi, just watching, cold, empty. I hit the horn hard, thinking maybe she was in shock or something. The blare echoed across the empty desert, but she didn't flinch, didn't blink, just kept staring at me with that one visible eye. Then, between one blink and the next, she was gone. Not like she ran off or moved aside. She literally disappeared, like someone had just erased her from existence. 1 second there, the next second nothing but empty road in my headlights. I sat there for what felt like forever, hands shaking, sweat pouring down my back despite the cold. Part of me wanted to get out and look around, but a deeper, more primal part knew better. Eventually, I put the truck back in gear and started moving, but I couldn't get above 40 miles per hour. My eyes kept scanning the road, the shoulders, expecting to see her again. About 30 minutes later, I spotted the lights of a rest stop and pulled in, deciding I needed to stop for the night regardless of my delivery schedule. My nerves were shot. There was a small convenience store still open, one of those 24-hour places that cater to truckers and overnight travelers. The kind with the flickering fluorescent lights and shelves of beef jerky and energy drinks. The clerk was an old guy, had to be in his 70s at least. Wispy white hair, deep wrinkles, the kind of leathery skin you get from decades in the desert sun. His name tag said Earl. I grabbed a coffee and some snacks, trying to act normal, but my hands were still shaking when I set everything on the counter. "Coming from up north?" he asked as he rang me up. I nodded. "Idaho, headed to Vegas." He studied my face for a moment, then said something that made my blood run cold. "You saw her, didn't you? The woman in white." I just stared at him, couldn't even form words for a second. "How did you got that look about you?" He sighed, punching numbers into his ancient register. "Most drivers who come through this time of night with that look on their face, they've seen her." "What the hell is going on out there?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding strange even to me. Earl bagged my items slowly, deliberately, like he was considering how much to tell me. Been stories about her for decades. Some say she died in a crash back in the 70s. Car went off the road, no one found her for weeks. Others think she's looking for someone who left her. Lots of theories. "She was in the middle of the road," I said. "I almost hit her, and then she just disappeared." Earl nodded like this was completely normal information. "Sometimes she's on the shoulder, sometimes in the road. Sometimes folks see her in their rearview mirror sitting in their back seat." He must have seen the color drain from my face because he quickly added, "But that's rare. Most just see her standing there, like you did." "What is she, a ghost?" Earl shrugged. "Don't know that anyone knows for sure. Highway's got a history. Native land, old mining operations that collapsed with people inside, all sorts of tragedy out in that desert." I took my coffee, trying to steady my nerves. "Has anyone ever, I don't know, investigated this? Called the police?" "Oh, sure. Over the years, plenty have reported it. Police go out, find nothing. No evidence, no footprints, nothing." He leaned forward slightly. "Most drivers who see her, they make it to their destination just fine. Shaken up, but fine." The way he said it made my skin crawl. "Most drivers?" Earl's expression turned grave. "Some don't make it to where they're going. Trucks found empty on the shoulder, drivers never seen again. Cars wrapped around poles with no explanation how they got there." He paused. "But that's not common. Mostly people just get a scare like you did. I felt sick. Great, that's great. If I were you, Earl said, sliding my change across the counter, I'd bunk down here for the night. Continue in the daylight. Highway's different then, safer. I took his advice. Spent the night in my sleeper cab, barely sleeping a wink. Every sound, the wind against the truck, other vehicles pulling in and out, had me sitting bolt upright, half expecting to see that woman's face pressed against my window. When the first light of dawn finally came, I felt a relief so profound I almost cried. I made it to Vegas the next afternoon. Delivery was late, got chewed out by the receiving manager, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I was just glad to be alive, to be somewhere with people and noise and light. That was 6 months ago. I've driven that stretch of Highway 93 3 times since then, but only during daylight hours. I refuse night runs on that road now, even though it's cost me some decent paying loads. My dispatcher thinks I'm being ridiculous, but he wasn't there. He didn't see her. The thing that keeps me up at night isn't just the encounter itself. It's wondering what would have happened if I hadn't stopped in time. Would my truck have passed right through her? Would I have felt the impact? Or would something else have happened? Something that would explain why some drivers who see her never reach their destination. I've looked online, found some forum posts from other drivers who've had similar experiences on that highway. Some stories match mine almost exactly. Others are worse, much worse. I keep thinking about what Earl said about trucks found empty on the shoulder. Last week, I got an email from the company that owns that rest stop. It was a mass email about renovations and temporary closures. There was a list of employee names at the bottom, people to contact with questions. Earl's name wasn't on it. When I called to ask about him, the manager told me they hadn't had an employee by that name in over 15 years. So now I'm left wondering what exactly happened that night, who I really talked to, and whether she's out there right now standing on that dark highway, waiting for the next set of headlights to approach. If you're driving Highway 93 through Nevada at night and you see a woman in a white dress, don't stop. Don't slow down. And whatever you do, don't look in your rearview mirror. Story 15. I still don't know how to explain what happened to us on that road. It's been 3 months, and I wake up every night in a cold sweat, feeling like I'm still driving, always driving, never reaching anywhere. I need to write this down. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it all. It was late September when Greg, Sarah, and I decided to take that cross-country road trip from New York to California. We'd been planning it since college graduation, one last adventure before real life started. Greg had this old Jeep Cherokee that he swore would make it all the way, and Sarah had meticulously mapped out all these scenic routes and attractions. I was just happy to be along for the ride, honestly. The first few days were everything we'd hoped for. We took turns driving, blasted music with the windows down, and stopped at random roadside attractions. We slept in cheap motels or camped under the stars when the weather was nice. I remember this one night in Pennsylvania where we pulled over at this lookout point and just stared at the sky for hours. Sarah kept pointing out constellations, and Greg told these ridiculous ghost stories that had us laughing until our sides hurt. Everything changed when we hit Nebraska. I don't know what it was about that state. Maybe it was the endless fields of corn and wheat that seemed to stretch into infinity. Maybe it was how the towns got further and further apart. Whatever it was, something felt off. The radio stations started to fade in and out, and our phones would randomly lose signal, even though they showed full bars. It was the 4th night of our trip. I was taking the late shift driving while Greg and Sarah dozed off. The clock on the dashboard read 2:15 in the morning, and we'd been on the same highway for what felt like forever. Just a straight shot through absolute darkness, with nothing but cornfields on either side. The headlights barely cut through the thick darkness ahead of us. Greg woke up and stretched in the passenger seat. He squinted at the road ahead and then at the GPS. "Dude, is it just me, or have we been on this same road forever?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. I nodded, feeling a weird sense of relief that someone else had noticed it too. "Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. It's like we're not getting anywhere. The GPS showed us on a straight highway, Route 87, supposedly heading west. But it felt like we'd been passing the same scenery for hours. The same pattern of fields, the occasional abandoned farm equipment, the same crooked telephone poles. Sarah woke up then, yawning from the back seat. "What's going on?" "We think we've been on the same road for too long," Greg told her. She laughed it off. "You guys are just tired and paranoid. It's Nebraska. It all looks the same." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was this feeling in my gut, like we were being swallowed by the road, like it was consuming us mile by mile. That's when I saw it, a flickering light in the distance. It was the first sign of civilization we'd seen in hours, and I immediately steered toward it. As we got closer, I could make out a single gas station sitting at an intersection of two dirt roads. The sign was old and rusted, and I couldn't even read what brand it was supposed to be. "Let's stop and ask for directions," I suggested, "and I need coffee anyway." Greg nodded, and Sarah mumbled something about needing to use a bathroom. I pulled into the lot, the tires crunching over gravel. The place looked like something out of the 1950s, those old-style pumps with the round tops, a single light bulb swinging above the entrance, buzzing with moths. Inside, it was eerily quiet. No music, no refrigerator hum, just silence. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting weird shadows across the dusty shelves stocked with expired snacks and faded soda cans. The cashier stood behind the counter, an old man with sunken eyes and skin that seemed to hang off his bones. He watched me approach without saying a word. "Hi there," I said, trying to sound casual. "We're heading west to California. Just wanted to check if we're still on the right route." He stared at me for what felt like minutes before finally speaking. His voice was dry like sandpaper. "Don't take the road tonight," he said, his eyes never blinking. "There's something on the road. People who go down it don't come back." A chill ran down my spine, but I forced a laugh. "Right, well, we're just passing through. How far to the next town?" "You should stay here tonight," he insisted, ignoring my question. "It ain't safe out there, not at night, not on that road." I bought some coffee and snacks, convinced it was just some small-town superstition or his way of trying to get us to stay at whatever local motel he was probably getting kickbacks from. When I got back to the car, I decided not to mention the weird warning to the others. No point in freaking everyone out over nothing. We continued driving. The coffee kept me alert, but it couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. According to the GPS, we should have been making progress, but the landscape never changed. Just endless fields under a moonless sky. Around 4 in the morning, Sarah checked the map on her phone. "Hey, this is weird," she said, frowning at the screen. "We should have reached Hollow Creek by now. It's a small town, but it should definitely be here." Greg leaned over to look. "Maybe we missed it." "No way," she insisted. "It's right on the highway. We couldn't have missed it." I glanced at the GPS. It was frozen, showing us in the same location for over an hour. I tapped the screen, but nothing changed. "Piece of crap," I muttered, unplugging it and plugging it back in. Nothing. That's when we saw him. Standing right in the middle of the highway, illuminated by our headlights, was a man. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as we skidded to a stop just feet away from him. He was tall and gaunt, wearing tattered clothes that hung off his frame. His eyes reflected our headlights like an animal's would, glowing in the darkness. None of us moved or spoke as he slowly approached the driver's side window. I hesitantly rolled it down, just a crack. "You're on the wrong road," he said, his voice hollow and distant. "You can't go back. You can only go forward." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "We're just trying to get to the next town." His smile revealed blackened gums and missing teeth. "There is no next town. Not for you. Not anymore." And then he walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond our headlights. "What the actual fuck?" Greg whispered, his face pale. Sarah was shaking in the back seat. Let's turn around. I don't like this. I agreed and made a U-turn, heading back the way we came. We drove in tense silence for about 20 minutes when Sarah gasped. "Guys, we should have reached that gas station by now." She was right. We'd been driving for at least as long as it had taken us to get from the station to where we'd seen that man. But there was no sign of it. Just more highway, more fields, more darkness. As dawn approached, the road began to twist and turn in ways that made no sense. The straight highway was gone, replaced by winding paths that curved through increasingly bizarre landscapes. The cornfields gave way to dead trees with twisted branches that seemed to reach for the sky like skeletal hands. The sky itself looked wrong, not the gradual lightening of dawn, but a sickly greenish glow that didn't come from any sun I could see. "I don't remember any of this," Greg said, his voice tight with fear. "This isn't the way we came." I kept driving because I didn't know what else to do. The needle on the gas gauge was hovering near empty, and our phones had all died despite being fully charged earlier. Then we saw it, a town in the distance. Relief washed over us until we got closer and realized something was very wrong. The buildings were there, but they looked abandoned. Houses with broken windows, empty storefronts with faded signs, a church with its steeple collapsed inward, and most disturbing of all, no people. Not a single person anywhere. I drove slowly down the main street, looking for any sign of life. We passed a diner with plates still set on the tables but covered in a thick layer of dust. A playground with swings moving gently despite there being no wind. "Let's just get gas and get out of here," Sarah whispered, as if afraid that speaking too loudly would wake something up. We found a gas station on the edge of town, but the pumps were dead. No electricity. "Let's try to leave and find another town," Greg suggested. "This place gives me the creeps." I turned the car around and headed for the road we'd come in on, but it was gone. Instead, there was just a dirt path that led back into town. We tried another exit and another, but every single one led us back to the center of town, like we were trapped in some kind of loop. The buildings began to look different each time we passed them. Older, more ruined. Time didn't seem to work properly here. The sky never fully brightened, stuck in that eerie green twilight. Our Jeep finally ran out of gas in front of what once might have been the town hall. We sat there in silence, too terrified to leave the car, but knowing we couldn't stay forever. The radio, which had been dead for hours, suddenly crackled to life. Through the static, a voice, the same hollow voice as the man on the road, spoke. "You can't go back. You can only go forward." Then silence again. We eventually left the car, hoping to find food or water or any sign of what happened here. The town seemed to shift around us. Streets would change direction when we weren't looking. Buildings appeared and disappeared. We found a calendar in one house dated 1957, and in the next house, a newspaper from 2008. We lost track of time completely. Day never fully came, and night never fully fell. We were just existing in this place that shouldn't exist. On what might have been our third day there, it's impossible to tell, we found an old pickup truck with keys in the ignition and miraculously gas in the tank. Without discussing it, we all piled in, desperate to try escaping again. I drove down a road we hadn't tried before, hope building as we left the town behind. The road stretched ahead, empty and promising. For the first time in what felt like forever, we thought we might make it out. Then the road began to change. The asphalt turned to dirt, then to gravel, then to something that looked like road but felt wrong under the tires. The trees on either side grew denser, their branches reaching over the road to form a canopy that blocked out what little light there was. And suddenly, we were back at the intersection with the gas station where this whole nightmare began. The same flickering light, the same rusty sign. But this time, the station looked abandoned, decades old, with broken windows and pumps covered in rust and vines. The old man was still there, though, standing outside, waiting for us, as if he'd been there all along. "I told you not to take the road," he said as we pulled up. His voice sounded different now, less human somehow. Now you belong to it, just like the rest of us. That's when I noticed them. Shadows moving in the darkness behind him. Dozens, maybe hundreds of people. Some looked recent, others like they'd stepped out of another century. All with the same hollow eyes, the same gaunt appearance. We tried to drive away, but the truck died, and no amount of turning the key would bring it back to life. Greg grabbed the baseball bat we kept in the Jeep for protection, and we backed away from the approaching figures. "What do you want from us?" Sarah screamed at them. The old man's face split into that terrible smile again. "We don't want anything. The road wants you. It's always hungry for more travelers." They surrounded us, these people who weren't people anymore. Victims of whatever supernatural force controlled this place, this Hollow Creek road that wasn't on any map. I don't remember what happened next. I woke up alone back in our Jeep, which was somehow working again. No sign of Greg or Sarah. The GPS showed me on a highway in Nebraska, but I know better now. I'm still on that road, that endless road that loops back on itself, that feeds on those who travel it. I've been driving for what feels like months, trying to find a way out, trying to find my friends. Sometimes I see them in the distance, but they always vanish when I get close. Sometimes I see that town, but it looks different each time. Sometimes I see other travelers, lost like me, but they never stop when I flash my lights. The only constant is the road, always the road, stretching endlessly before me. I'm writing this at another gas station, one that appeared out of nowhere just like the first. My phone connected to Wi-Fi for the first time in forever. I don't know how long this connection will last. I don't know if anyone will read this. But if you're driving through Nebraska and see a road that feels wrong somehow, a road that seems to swallow the light, please turn around. Don't make the same mistake we did, because once you're on this road, you can never truly leave it. The connection's getting weak now. I have to go. I think I just saw Greg walking along the shoulder up ahead. Story 16. I've been sitting here for hours trying to figure out how to write this down. My hands are still shaking. It's been 3 weeks since I got off that ship, and I still wake up in cold sweats, hearing those whispers. I need to tell someone about what happened on the MS Valhalla, even if no one believes me. I'm a lawyer, or I was until I took an indefinite leave of absence after this happened. My girlfriend Melanie had been begging me to take a vacation for months. I'd been working 80-hour weeks at the firm trying to make partner, and it was killing me. Dark circles under my eyes, living on coffee and takeout. When the opportunity came up to book a cabin on the maiden voyage of the Valhalla, this massive new cruise ship they were calling the Floating City, Mel jumped on it, said it would be romantic. God, I wish we'd just gone to a beach somewhere instead. We boarded in Miami on a Sunday. The ship was unbelievable. 20 decks, multiple pools, restaurants, theaters, you name it. Our cabin was on deck 8, port side, with a private balcony. The whole place had that new ship smell, everything spotless and modern. We spent the first day exploring, drinking overpriced cocktails and enjoying the sail away party. It felt good to finally relax. That first night was perfect. We had dinner at the main restaurant, watched the sunset from our balcony, made love. I remember thinking how lucky I was, how this was exactly what we needed. Mel fell asleep in my arms, and for the first time in months, I slept soundly. The second day was normal too. We lounged by the pool, got couples massages at the spa, all that typical cruise stuff. That night though, around 11:30, everything changed. We were in bed, both half asleep, when this weird vibration ran through the entire ship. Not like the normal engine vibrations. This was different, like a deep shudder that went from bow to stern. The lights flickered off for maybe 5 seconds, then came back on. I sat up, and Mel grabbed my arm. "What was that?" she asked. I told her it was probably nothing, just the ship settling or something. New vessel, maybe they were still working out some kinks. She seemed satisfied with that explanation and fell back asleep pretty quickly. But I couldn't sleep. Something felt off. I got up and went out onto our balcony. The night was clear, stars everywhere, the ocean calm. Nothing seemed wrong, but I had this inexplicable feeling of dread in my stomach. The next morning at breakfast, we overheard people at the next table talking about a passenger who had disappeared overnight. According to them, a man in his 40s had vanished from his cabin. His wife woke up and he was just gone. I heard from my friend who works in security that they checked all the cameras, a woman was saying. He never left his room, just disappeared. Mel brushed it off as gossip, but it stuck with me. After breakfast, we went to the pool deck, but there were crew members everywhere talking into radios, looking concerned. I overheard one of them say they were doing a complete sweep of the ship. Around 2 in the afternoon, I told Mel I was going to check out the gym while she went to a cooking demonstration, but really, I wanted to see if I could find out more about the missing passenger. I'd seen security personnel going in and out of a corridor on deck 6, so I headed there. Sure enough, there was yellow caution tape blocking off an entire section of the hallway. A crew member stood guard, but he was busy talking to someone on his radio. I lingered nearby, pretending to read a ship map on the wall. "I don't care what the captain says," the guard was saying. "We need to tell the passengers something. People are asking questions." I couldn't hear the response, but the guard looked frustrated. "Fine, but I'm telling you, there's no way he could have just vanished. And now that whole section is, I don't know how to describe it. It feels wrong in there." That was all I heard before he noticed me and straightened up. I walked away quickly, but those words kept repeating in my head. It feels wrong in there. I didn't tell Mel about what I'd overheard. Didn't want to freak her out. We had dinner, saw a show, and went back to our cabin around 11. She fell asleep quickly, but I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about that cordoned-off hallway. Something was pulling at me, like an itch I couldn't scratch. At about 1:30 in the morning, I carefully got out of bed, threw on some clothes, and slipped out of our cabin. The corridors were mostly deserted at that hour. I took the stairs down to deck 6 and made my way to the taped-off section. To my surprise, there was no guard anymore, just the yellow tape stretched across the entrance to the hallway. I stood there for a minute, debating with myself. This was stupid, right? I should just go back to bed. But that feeling, that pull, was stronger than ever. I ducked under the tape and walked down the hallway. The lights were dimmer here, giving everything a shadowy underwater quality. At the end of the corridor was a door marked "Crew Only." I tried the handle, expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. The door opened into another hallway, narrower than the main corridors, with pipes running along the ceiling. This must be part of the behind-the-scenes area of the ship, where passengers weren't supposed to go. I followed it, heart pounding in my chest. Why was I doing this? I couldn't have answered if you'd asked me. I just felt like I had to. I'd gone maybe 50 feet when I saw her, a woman in a crew uniform standing at the intersection of 2 corridors. She was pale, with dark circles under her eyes, and something about her seemed off, like she wasn't quite solid. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," I replied. "I'm just trying to find out what happened to that passenger." She shook her head slowly. "Go back. It isn't safe." But even as she said this, she stepped aside, as if she knew I couldn't turn back. "What's your name?" I asked. "Elena," she said. "I was a steward on the Valhalla's sister ship." Was. I didn't have time to question that because something down the corridor to my right caught my attention. A faint blue light pulsing from beneath another door. "What's in there?" I asked. Elena's face showed genuine fear. Something that shouldn't be. Something they woke when they built this ship. I should have been scared. I should have run back to my cabin and forgotten all about this. But that pull was overwhelming now, like a physical force drawing me toward that door. I walked past Elena, who made no move to stop me. The blue light pulsed stronger as I approached. The door was metal, with no markings, just a simple handle. When I touched it, it was ice cold. I opened it. What I saw inside is hard to describe, and even harder to believe. It wasn't a room. It was emptiness. A vast, endless void that couldn't possibly fit inside the ship. It was like looking into space, but instead of stars, there were swirling patterns of blue-white light, stretching as far as I could see, and suspended in the middle of this impossible space, maybe 20 feet from the doorway, was a man. He was floating, arms and legs splayed out, completely motionless. His eyes were open but unseeing, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. I knew immediately this was the missing passenger. Around him, filling the void, were whispers, hundreds, maybe thousands of voices speaking in languages I'd never heard. Some sounded ancient, others not human at all. They ebbed and flowed like waves, sometimes getting louder, sometimes fading to near silence. I stood transfixed, unable to move or speak. The whispers suddenly focused, becoming a single voice speaking in English. "Another comes to feed us." Terror finally broke through my paralysis. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut. The whispers rose to a deafening chorus, all saying the same thing. "You should not have come here." I pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The blue light began to pulse faster, and I felt a tugging sensation, as if the void itself was trying to pull me in. My feet started to slide across the floor toward the open space. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew no one could hear me. But someone did. Elena appeared beside me, her form flickering like a bad TV signal. She grabbed my arm, her touch ice cold, and pulled me toward the door. "Focus," she hissed. "Picture the door opening. Will it to happen?" I didn't understand, but I was desperate. I visualized the door swinging open, concentrated on it with everything I had. The handle turned under my grip, and suddenly we were tumbling back into the corridor. The door slammed shut behind us, and the blue light disappeared. I lay on the floor, gasping for breath. Elena stood over me, more transparent than before. "What the hell was that?" I managed to ask. "A breach," she said. "A tear between worlds. They built this ship over an ancient site, a place where the barrier is thin. The engines, the vibrations, they widened the tear." "What? What are those things in there?" "Hungry things, old things. They've been waiting a long time." She looked at me with hollow eyes. "They got me 6 months ago, during sea trials on the other ship. Now I'm part of it. Soon they'll have enough energy to break through completely." "We need to tell someone," I said, struggling to my feet. "The captain, the crew." "They know," Elena interrupted. "Why do you think this section is cordoned off? But they won't cancel the voyage. Too much money at stake." "Then we need to get off this ship," I said. Elena's form flickered again. "You should hurry. They know you now. They'll be looking for you." I ran back through the corridors, not caring if anyone saw me. I made it to our cabin and burst in, waking Melanie. "We need to get off this ship," I told her, already grabbing our suitcases. "As soon as we dock tomorrow." She sat up, confused and alarmed. "Evan, what are you talking about? What's wrong?" I couldn't tell her the truth. She'd think I was crazy. "I overheard crew members talking. There's something wrong with the ship. Structural issues. It's not safe." I could see she didn't fully believe me, but my panic was real enough to convince her something was wrong. We packed our essential items and tried to go back to sleep, planning to disembark first thing in the morning. But when I woke up and checked the ship's app on my phone, my blood ran cold. Our first port of call had been cancelled due to weather conditions. We wouldn't be docking anywhere for another 2 days, and the ship-wide announcement that morning confirmed my worst fears. 2 more passengers had disappeared overnight. I'm writing this now from our cabin. Melanie is in the shower. I've tried telling guest services we need to get off the ship. Medical emergency, family crisis, anything, but they keep saying it's impossible until we reach port. I can feel it watching me, that thing in the void, waiting. I've started hearing the whispers even when I'm awake, calling my name. Twice now I've seen Elena in our cabin trying to warn me about something, but she disappears before she can speak. The ship shuddered again an hour ago. Longer this time. The lights were out for nearly a minute. I don't think we're going to make it to port. I don't think anyone on this ship is safe. Whatever's in that void is getting stronger. And soon... Wait, there's someone at the door. Melanie's still in the shower, so it can't be her. The knocking is getting louder. I can hear whispers coming through the door. They know my name. They know I'm in here. Oh God, the handle is turning. I don't think I locked it. The door is opening, but there's no one there. Just darkness, blue light, whispers. They've found me. Story 17. I've been a long-haul trucker for almost 20 years, and let me tell you, the open road has its secrets. But what happened to me 4 months ago on Highway 93 in Arizona isn't something I've been able to shake off. I haven't driven a rig since, and I doubt I ever will again. It was a routine job, or so I thought. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer from Phoenix to Vegas, something I'd done dozens of times before. The company I worked for, handles all kinds of refrigerated transport, and I never paid much attention to the manifests. Food, medical supplies, whatever needed to stay cold, I'd get it there. The pay was good, and I'd built a reputation for reliability. That night started like any other. I left Phoenix around 10 in the evening, planning to reach Vegas by early morning. I prefer night driving, less traffic, cooler temperatures, especially crossing the Arizona desert. Highway 93 isn't exactly a scenic route, just miles of empty desert with the occasional rest stop or gas station. By 1 in the morning, I was deep into the drive. The highway was completely deserted, hadn't seen another vehicle for at least 40 minutes. Just me, my headlights cutting through the darkness, and that endless ribbon of asphalt. The radio was playing some old country music, keeping me company. The moon was almost full that night, casting this eerie glow over the desert landscape. I remember checking my temperature gauges, making sure the refrigeration unit was running properly. The cargo area was set to 20 degrees below freezing, standard procedure for this type of haul. Everything was normal, everything was fine. Then my CB radio crackled. At first I thought it was just static. You get that a lot out in remote areas. But then I heard a voice, faint and distorted, like someone was speaking from inside a tunnel. Don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop. Just that, nothing else. I picked up the receiver and asked who was out there, but got no response. Just dead air. I figured it was probably some trucker messing around, or maybe the signal had bounced from somewhere far away. It happens sometimes. Still, something about the voice sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't playful or joking, it was urgent, almost desperate. About 10 minutes later, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. They were coming up fast, way too fast for a highway with a 75 mph speed limit. In this part of Arizona, you might go an hour without seeing another vehicle at night, so this caught my attention immediately. I eased toward the right lane to let them pass. The vehicle pulled alongside me, and that's when my night took a turn into something I still can't explain. It was an old pickup truck, looked like a Ford from the 60s, with faded blue paint and rusted edges. The kind of vehicle that should have been in a junkyard decades ago. But what made my blood freeze wasn't the truck itself, it was the driver's seat. It was empty. I'm not talking about someone slouched down or difficult to see. There was nobody behind the wheel. The steering wheel was turning by itself, making small adjustments to keep pace with my rig. I blinked hard, thinking maybe fatigue was playing tricks on me. But no, the driver's seat was completely empty, and that old truck was keeping perfect pace with my 18-wheeler going 70 miles per hour. I eased off the gas, thinking maybe I could let it pass and get a better look. That's when things got weirder. The truck slowed down exactly as I did, maintaining its position right beside me. Then, without warning, it suddenly veered off the highway, driving straight into the desert. No brake lights, no turn signal, just a sharp right turn off the asphalt and into the sand and scrub. I watched in my side mirror as the truck's taillights bounced and jostled over the rough terrain, getting smaller and smaller until they disappeared completely behind a ridge. Just vanished like it had never been there at all. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I've heard trucker ghost stories my whole career, every driver has, but I'd always written them off as tall tales meant to spook rookies. But this was happening to me, and it was very, very real. I reached for my thermos of coffee, needing something to steady my nerves, when I noticed my breath fogging in front of my face. The temperature in the cab was dropping rapidly. I checked the air conditioning controls, but they were set to heat, not cool. Outside, the desert night was around 70 degrees, warm for midnight, even in Arizona. But inside my cab, it felt like winter was setting in. The dashboard thermometer confirmed what I was feeling. The temperature inside had plummeted to 40 degrees and was still dropping. In seconds, it hit 30, then 20. My windshield began to frost over from the inside, starting at the edges and creeping inward like icy fingers. I cranked the defrost to max, but it made no difference. Then the strangest thing happened. My truck, which had been humming along without a single mechanical issue, just stopped. The engine didn't sputter or stall. It simply cut out as if someone had turned the key to off. All at once, the headlights died. The dashboard went dark, and I felt the massive weight of the rig begin to slow on the empty highway until it rolled to a complete stop in the middle of the road. The silence was absolute. No engine, no radio, no air conditioning, just my own ragged breathing and the quiet ticking of cooling metal. I tried the ignition, but nothing happened, not even a click. It was as if every electrical system in the truck had been completely drained. That's when I noticed the fog. It wasn't coming from outside. It was swirling around my trailer, visible in my side mirrors, a thick, unnatural mist that seemed to be emanating from the refrigerated unit itself. I'd never seen anything like it. The fog was dense and white, hugging close to the ground and curling around the wheels of my trailer. I remember thinking, this isn't right. This isn't physically possible. But there it was, surrounding my truck in the middle of a bone-dry desert highway. I had two choices: stay in the cab or get out and investigate. Every instinct told me to stay put, to lock the doors and wait for dawn or another vehicle. But something else, curiosity maybe, or some compulsion I couldn't explain, made me reach for the door handle. The metal was ice cold, painful to touch. When I pushed the door open, the hinges creaked from the frost that had formed on them. I climbed down, my boots crunching on what should have been asphalt, but was now covered in a thin layer of ice. The temperature outside had to be well below freezing, impossible for the Arizona desert, even at night. I walked alongside my truck, running my hand along the frost-covered metal. The fog was thicker now, swirling around my legs, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. I made my way toward the back of the trailer, drawn there by something I couldn't explain. That's when I saw it, a figure standing in the mist behind my trailer. It was tall, at least 7 feet, wearing what looked like a long hooded cloak. I couldn't see a face within the hood, just darkness. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, about 20 feet from the back of my trailer. I should have run. I should have sprinted back to the cab, locked the doors, and waited for help. But I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, not from the cold, but from a paralyzing fear unlike anything I've ever experienced. The figure slowly raised an arm and pointed at the cargo doors of my trailer. That's when I heard the whisper again, this time not from the CB radio, but seemingly from the air all around me. Look inside, see what you carry. My legs moved of their own accord, carrying me to the back of the trailer. My hands, numb with cold, fumbled with the latch. It took 3 tries before I could release it, swinging the heavy door open. A blast of Arctic air hit me, along with the smell, a smell I recognized immediately but couldn't place in my panic. The interior lights of the trailer flickered on, revealing what was inside. Bodies, human bodies, stacked and frozen, wrapped in clear plastic. Dozens of them, men, women, some looking like they'd been there for days, others perhaps longer. Their skin was blue-white from the extreme cold, eyes frozen open in expressions of terror. I stumbled backward, falling onto the icy asphalt. Bile rose in my throat and I vomited onto the ground beside me. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be my cargo. I transported food, medicine, sometimes even organs for transplant. But this was impossible. I looked up, searching for the hooded figure, but it was gone. The fog was dissipating rapidly, and the temperature was rising. I could feel the desert heat returning. In the distance, I heard the rumble of an approaching vehicle. My truck's engine suddenly roared to life on its own, headlights blazing through the remaining wisps of fog. The refrigeration unit made a loud mechanical groan, then settled into its normal hum. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the back of the trailer. The cargo doors were closed and latched, exactly as they should be during transport. Had I imagined opening them? Had I hallucinated the entire thing? With shaking hands, I unlatched the doors again and swung them open. Inside was my regular cargo, pallets of boxed medical supplies. No bodies, no horror scene, just the routine load I'd picked up in Phoenix. The approaching vehicle turned out to be a state trooper. He pulled up behind my truck, lights flashing, and asked if I was having trouble. I must have looked like hell, pale, sweating, clearly terrified. But I managed to tell him I'd had engine trouble that seemed to have resolved itself. He offered to follow me to the next rest stop just to be safe, and I gratefully accepted. I completed that delivery to Vegas, dropped my truck at the depot, handed in my keys, and quit on the spot. 20 years of trucking, and I walked away without a second thought. The company tried to convince me to stay, even offered me a significant raise, but my mind was made up. I still don't know what happened that night on Highway 93. Was it a hallucination from fatigue, some kind of waking nightmare, or was it something supernatural, something beyond explanation? What I do know is this. Every night since then, just as I'm about to fall asleep, I hear that whisper one more time, "Don't stop." And I wonder, what would have happened if I had never stopped on that empty stretch of Highway 93? Story 18. I still can't explain what happened that night at the warehouse. I've been trying to make sense of it for weeks now, but nothing adds up. I was hoping someone here might have experienced something similar or could at least tell me I'm not going crazy. I'd been working as a night security guard at this old warehouse downtown for about 2 months. The pay was decent, especially for the night shift, and honestly, I needed the money after losing my day job. The place was ancient, one of those brick industrial buildings from the early 1900s that somehow survived all the downtown renovations. It mostly stored old machinery parts and office equipment for some corporate company, nothing valuable enough to attract thieves, which made the job pretty easy. My shift started at 11 at night and ended at 7 in the morning. Most nights were exactly the same. I'd check in, grab my flashlight and radio, get settled in the small security office with its wall of fuzzy monitors, do my rounds every couple hours, and try not to fall asleep in between. The most exciting thing that ever happened was when a raccoon somehow got inside last month and knocked over some boxes. That night started like any other. I showed up at 10:45, chatted with Dave from the evening shift for a few minutes while he filled me in on absolutely nothing happening, and then he left. I made some coffee in the tiny pot we kept in the security office, that stale, bitter stuff that tastes terrible but keeps you awake, and settled in for another boring night. But something felt off right from the beginning. There was this smell in the air I hadn't noticed before. At first I thought maybe something was wrong with the coffee. But when I walked into the hallway, it was stronger. It was like rotting wood or mildew, but sharper somehow. I figured maybe a pipe had burst somewhere and was causing water damage, so I made a note to mention it in my report. Around midnight, I started my first patrol. The warehouse had 3 main sections: the storage area with all the big crates and equipment, the loading docks, and the old office area that nobody used anymore. I always followed the same route. Storage first, then offices, then loading docks. The smell got stronger as I moved through the storage area. It was dark except for the emergency lights and my flashlight. I've never been afraid of the dark, but there was something about the shadows between the tall shelves that night that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, like something was watching me. At 12:13, I remember checking my watch. I was passing by one of the small storage rooms when I noticed the door was open. That was definitely wrong. Those rooms were always kept locked, and I had checked this one myself yesterday. I radioed into the empty security office out of habit, reporting the open door, then approached slowly. The smell was coming from inside the room. It was almost overwhelming now, like something had died in there. I swept my flashlight around, but the room was completely empty, just concrete floors and walls. No shelves, no boxes, nothing that could be causing that smell. I was about to leave when the door slammed shut behind me. Not like it was caught by a draft. It slammed, hard enough that I felt the vibration in the floor. My heart nearly stopped. I spun around and tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Hello?" I called out, thinking maybe another guard had shown up and was playing a prank. No answer. I was trying not to panic, focusing on getting the door open, when I caught movement in the corner of my eye. I swung my flashlight toward it and froze. There was something there. A hunched shadow in the corner of the room where I swear nothing had been seconds before. It was hard to make out its shape. It seemed to absorb my flashlight beam instead of reflecting it. I blinked and it was gone. Just an empty corner again. I must have imagined it, right? But then I heard something that sounded like breathing. Not normal breathing. This was wet and ragged, like someone with fluid in their lungs. I didn't wait around to investigate. I kicked the door as hard as I could, aiming next to the handle where the lock would be. It took 3 kicks before the old wood splintered and the door flew open. I ran back to the security office, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Old buildings make weird noises. Doors close by themselves because of air pressure changes. Shadows play tricks on your eyes when you're alone at night. But I couldn't explain the smell, or why that room had been empty when it should have been full of supplies, or why the door had locked by itself. Back in the security office, I tried to calm down. I checked all the camera feeds, looking for anything unusual. Everything seemed normal until I noticed movement on camera 6, which covered the northeast corridor leading to the loading docks. Something tall and dark moved across the screen. It wasn't clear. The cameras in this place were ancient and grainy, but it definitely wasn't a guard. It moved wrong, like its limbs were too long for its body. I grabbed the radio and called for backup, though I knew no one would answer. I was the only guard on duty. Still, protocol was protocol. Security to main office. I've got a possible intruder in the northeast corridor, requesting backup. Nothing but static in response. I checked my watch again. 1:47. Still over 5 hours left in my shift. I had 2 choices. I could stay in the security office and hope whatever I saw didn't find me, or I could do my job and investigate. I decided to wait and keep watching the cameras. For the next 20 minutes, nothing happened. No more movement, no strange noises. I was starting to think I had imagined the whole thing. Lack of sleep does weird things to your brain. When the smell hit me again. It was in the security office now, even though the door had been closed the whole time. At 2:12, I made up my mind. I was going to check out the northeast corridor. If there was an intruder, I needed to know. I grabbed my flashlight, my radio, and the taser they gave us but told us never to use. Better to have it and not need it, I figured. The corridor to the loading docks was long and narrow, with high ceilings that made even small sounds echo. The emergency lights cast everything in a dim, greenish glow that did nothing to make the place less creepy. The smell was stronger here, mixed with something else now, something metallic, like blood. I moved slowly, sweeping my flashlight ahead of me. "Security," I called out. "If someone's here, identify yourself now." My voice sounded small in the huge space. When I reached the loading docks, everything seemed normal at first. The big roll-up doors were closed and locked. The forklift was parked in its usual spot. But then I noticed one of the smaller side doors was slightly ajar, the one that led outside to the employee parking lot. Had someone broken in? But the alarm should have gone off if that door opened. I approached the door cautiously, planning to check if the alarm system had been tampered with. That's when I heard it. "Alex," a whisper right behind me. My name. No one at the warehouse called me Alex. I was always just Ramirez on the schedule and reports. I hadn't told anyone my first name. I spun around, flashlight, raised like a weapon, but there was nothing there. The whisper came again, from a different direction now. Alex. Drawn out, almost playful, but in a way that made my skin crawl. That was it. I ran, straight back through the corridor toward the security office. Whatever was happening, I wasn't getting paid enough to deal with it alone in the middle of the night. I'd called the police, let them handle it. I slammed the security office door behind me and locked it, then grabbed the phone. No dial tone. I tried my cell phone. No signal. Not unusual in this building with its thick concrete walls, but now it felt deliberate. The monitors. I needed to see what was out there. I checked each camera feed methodically. Nothing unusual on 1 through 5. Camera 6, the northeast corridor I'd just fled from, showed something moving again. That same tall, dark figure, but now it was moving toward the security office, moving fast. Camera 7 covered the hallway right outside the office door. I watched, heart pounding, as the figure appeared on screen 7. It stopped outside my door. The image was grainy and distorted, but I could make out something vaguely human-shaped but wrong. Too tall, too thin, its proportions all stretched out, and its face. I still have nightmares about what I thought I saw there, or rather what I didn't see. Where a face should have been, there was just emptiness. The screen went black suddenly. Not just camera 7, all of them, one by one, from 7 down to 1. As each screen died, the lights in the security office dimmed until I was sitting in near darkness, illuminated only by my flashlight. Then I heard it. The door handle turning slowly. The lock that I know I had engaged making a soft click as it disengaged by itself. I backed away from the door, pressing myself against the far wall. My flashlight beam shook wildly as my hand trembled. The door began to open, inch by inch. The smell hit me like a physical force, rot and mildew and something else, something ancient and wrong. A long gray-white hand curled around the edge of the door. The fingers were too long, the joints bent at impossible angles. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move, I couldn't even scream. The door opened fully, and I saw it standing there. I don't have the words to describe what I saw. My mind won't let me remember it clearly. Just impressions, height, wrongness, that empty face and eyes, so many eyes, not where eyes should be. It spoke my name again, but not out loud. Somehow it was inside my head, a voice that felt like ice water being poured directly into my brain. Alex, we've been waiting for you. That's the last thing I remember clearly. There are flashes after that, running through the warehouse, doors opening and closing by themselves, that thing always right behind me no matter how fast I moved. I remember the loading dock, the night air, my car. I woke up at home the next morning with no memory of how I got there, called in sick, then quit the next day over the phone. I've been too afraid to go back, even to pick up my last paycheck. The weirdest part, when I finally got the courage to drive past the warehouse a week later, it was boarded up. Looked like it had been abandoned for years, but that's impossible. I worked there for 2 months. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know what that thing was or what it wanted with me. All I know is I still wake up sometimes smelling that rotting smell, and when I check my phone, it's always 12:13 or 2:12 a.m. And sometimes, just as I'm falling asleep, I hear my name being whispered from the dark corners of my room.